Good morning, everyone. I hope you all had a restful night. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be kickstarting our day with an exciting session on Politics 2.0. I would now like to call upon stage our speakers and our moderator. The first speaker is Ms. Abhinandita Mathur. She's the advisor to the Government of Delhi. Ma'am, please join us on stage. Our second panelist is my co-rider to the event, Mr. Lobsang Sange, Senior Fellow at Harvard University. Our third speaker is Ms. Priya Sehgal, Senior Executive Editor at NewsX. Welcome, ma'am. And the chair and the moderator for today's session is Mr. Rajdeep Roy. He's the Member of Parliament from Silchar, Assam. Welcome, sir. And with that, I hand over to sir to take us forward. Thank you so much.
Hello. So good morning, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the opening batsmen of today's play. I would like to welcome each and everybody of you to this India 2.0, rebooting to meta era, and particularly to this session, Politics 2.0. Politics 2.0, as it seems like, maybe new concept to many of us present. Initially, when I got the program where I would be speaking on 2.0, I asked this question to myself: 2.0 is what? And rather, what was 1.0? So if you have to speak on 2.0, you need to know what 1.0 was. That's my first understanding. So the politics of last yesteryears and all, to be very honest, with no offense meant for anybody, was very, slow starter. It was not a very open-ended issue. Politics was always top-down approach. Politics amongst whatever be the form of democracy was handed over to the masses. Whatever be the so-called diktats were issued to the people who used to follow certain guidelines, certain set of rules and all. So that's where politics 1.0 was like. Participation of the common man was not there much. In the last, say maybe 1 or 2 decades, politics has changed, a drastic change. Politics is actually the reflection of the society. Whatever changes has taken place in society gets reflected in our politics. And the major changes that has taken in the society is the overwhelming presence of internet all across the world. Population of the world, if you look at, almost same number of cell phone users, mobile users are there all across the world and all. If you leave aside Central Africa and East Africa, the presence of internet and mobile phone is almost anywhere between 60-65% to 95% in Scandinavian countries. So politics has taken a drastic change because the society has changed because of the input of technology in our day-to-day life. As politicians, if you look back at 2008 Barack Obama election, you will see the first footprints of technology in politics when Barack Obama introduced his connection tools, be it Facebook, Telegram, Twitter, or whatever, across all platforms. He connected with the American masses, be it his fundraisers, be it deciding his policies. And from there on, in 2014 in India, we saw Narendra Modi's campaign taking a leap. Even before his detractors in other parties could understand the impact of social media and usage of internet and social media as a communication tool, Narendra Modi ji was way ahead of others. So today we are in an era when technology is driving politics. So it's an interesting partnership between politics and technology. We'll come to all these as we talk. I would initially ask our esteemed panelists, you are aware of Priya Sehgalji. She will be making her initial remarks. If there are any questions from any other panelist, she will answer. We'll take questions from the house at the later part of the program. So let's carry on with the free-flowing discussion of Politics 2.0, what we understand, and then what the audience feel how things should be. Priyaji, all yours.
Thank you, Rajdeepji. Thank you for this introduction. And I think, you really set the tone for today's discussion. You said technology is the driver. I totally agree. Technology is the driver. It's an amplifier. But at the end of the day, you need a message or a face that drives this technology, that drives this. So I'm a journalist, so my role is to add a little masala. So I'm actually going to be talking faces, personalities first, before we go to the role of technology. Politics 2.0 is going to be driven by one person. It is, it is a very Modi-driven politics that is happening in India today. And there is really no opposition. The Congress that should have been there has not. We all know what is happening to the Congress. So since we have someone from the Aam Aadmi Party here, the Congress seems to have outsourced the opposition to the regional parties. At every state, if there is someone giving opposition to the BJP, it is that regional party. And the only one who has to, who is trying to build up, his place in the national narrative, it is Arvind Kejriwal. He is, if I would say, he's fashioning himself to be a Modi 2.0. So in the end, what he's really becoming is a Modi light. You look at his playbook. It is straight from Prime Minister Modi's playbook. One side, there's a chaiwala. One side, he says, I'm a Aam Aadmi. He says, politics of welfareism. Arvind Kejriwal does freebies. He's the Hindu Hridaya Samrat. The other one says, I can recite the Hanuman Chalisa at the drop of a hat, preferably in front of television cameras. So, he is actually, both are 24/7 politicians. Mamta Banerjee tried, but she is limited to her region. Arvind Kejriwal, in that sense, is not. He does have a pan-India recall. What he doesn't have is a pan-India party. We discussed this, and at lighter moments, we say that maybe, Congress is a party without a face, and here is a face without a party. Maybe Sonia should just adopt Arvind Kejriwal. But, having said that, since Arvind Kejriwal cannot get his party together in 2 years, he cannot have a pan-India presence, we are forced, thereby, to again take a look at the Congress. And the Congress, and here I bring in the role of the social media. Rahul Gandhi on his own is not such a bad leader. His problem is he came up against Prime Minister Modi, against any other BJP leader. I think Rahul would have had a chance. He has the Congress machinery, the goodwill of the people on the ground. There is some base. I think Rahul could have at least given some sort of a tucker. But he came across the cult of Prime Minister Modi, a cult that was amplified and built up by the social media. Rajdeep talked about Twitter and, the Obama campaign, which was later on adopted by the Modi campaign. I'm speaking to the converted because a lot of people here know more on the inside track than I do. We have people here who worked on the Modi campaign. They know exactly how it works and what happened. We saw it in 2014. Then the Congress wised up because there was not just a built-up of Modi, there was a take down of Rahul also as the Pappu figure. Then, of course, came 2014, where the Congress wised up and tried to, but the problem is Congress doesn't have a narrative. It doesn't, so you cannot just have a strategy. You need something to back that up, and that's where the Congress has really faltered. You look at Rahul Gandhi's comments in the last 1 year, whether he's spoken about China, he's been right on COVID, he's been right on the economy, and yet he's found no takers. There is no credibility. I mean, what could be worse for a leader who says the right things but doesn't find any takers because he has no credibility to sell the right things. On the other side, you have a lot of statements that are also slightly outlandish, but yet every election is won by the BJP. The people trust Modi. They trust BJP under him. That is the big gap. And the Congress thinks that you can fix it by just being a presence on the social media. Yesterday or day before, Rahul Gandhi tweeted about the price hike. One tweet does not set an agenda. You had that Chintan Shivir. Did you ever talk about inflation, economy? Did you make that your main agenda? Have you done any dharnas? No. So you have to back. Social media can be an amplifier. Social media and a virtual reality cannot replace the physical reality. We saw what happened in the 2022 UP elections. There was a huge presence of not just social media. It was like 2 elections of being fought. There was the first time I saw a lot of prevalence of YouTube channels. If you go to on the YouTube, there was Kisan bahut dukhi hai, Yogi is being wiped out, Modi will not go to Western UP, rally cancel kar rahe hain, ye wo. It was looking as if BJP is losing. But if you go to the mainstream channels, there was another, it was really like 2 elections were being fought. But what swung the thing for him, I was in fact speaking to some people here in the audience also, was the fact that Amit Shah went door to door, in Western UP. So that door to door, the physical presence is needed. You need someone to back, you can do it, and then of course you want everybody to know you've done it. That's where social media, the connect comes. It makes you more accessible to your voters, to your public. But it also, there is a danger of democracy by algorithms. Because if you just rely on the social media, then you get a social media bubble. You will only hear things that the media, the algorithm thinks you want to hear. So you will not hear the other viewpoint. That is a big danger that you must, be wary about. We'll talk about it a bit more. One more just thing, he spoke about Obama. Donald Trump was the first Twitter presidency. And therein you see how this also is a two-edged sword. For his was really a death by Twitter. He was, using Twitter like he's drunk dialing his ex-girlfriend. Every night he would go something warp and all, he would delete it, but it's out there in the World Wide Web, so you can't delete anything. Look at the way the BJP and Modi have used Twitter. He gives out a message, it is amplified by cabinet ministers, pracharaks, at all levels, the same message is hammered home. And those who know opinion polls know this is how you actually swing. If you show a poll saying this leader is leading, this leader is ahead, this leader is ahead, people, it's a loop in your mind, political loop. This is how algorithms work. That's you start believing it. It adds to your electoral winnability also. So these are some of the dangers. You can sell a good thing, you can also sell a bad thing. So I think we'll discuss all these pitfalls of living in a virtual world. But as I said, politics 2.0 without taking Prime Minister Modi is really, a bleak landscape for the opposition.
Thank you, Priyaji. You have actually hit the nail on the head. One very important remark you have made is that despite our social media presence, actually when you are in a campaign mode, especially in the last 1 month or so, the physical presence of the candidates and the leadership amongst the constituents is the most ultimate and is the most crucial thing. Through social media, you can actually direct your plans and policies and everything. You have talked about Rahul Gandhi, you have talked about Prime Minister Modi. We'll come to that in the course of the discussion. I would now ask Lobsang, a Tibetan by origin, had his schooling in the hills of Darjeeling. Hills I say because in Delhi it is dead summer, though not here. So, name of Lobsang will bring the temperature down in the hall, I suppose. Lobsang, all yours.
Thank you, Rajdeep ji. And as Priya on the right side started with Delhi, and before we go to AAP, back to Delhi, I was wondering what is my role, because I was added as speaker yesterday and I got the subtitle after dinner. Now I kind of figured it out. I think Ram Madhav ji and Saurabh in India Foundation said before, Delhi talks to Delhi, take them all over the world and bring them back to India. So that's what I will try to do, because I'll take you to Russia, Ukraine, Washington, D.C., and then, Samuel Huntington and back. When I was told to speak yesterday, initially I looked at the title. It says, meta era. Recently I just read that the Facebook has changed its company name to Meta in October last year. Since then, their stock has not been doing well. In the last 3 months, their stock has gone down more than 40%. And I think Mark Zuckerberg has lost more than $50 billion. Then yesterday I said, oh my goodness, Meta era, if India 2.0, rebooting towards Meta era, I was praying to Lord Shiva and Buddha saying, I hope it doesn't go towards Meta, the Facebook company, but the Meta, the technology era. So that was my first prayer. And then obviously, you can sense I flew all the way from Boston, 20 hours, landed here, I'm going back straight. That means it's midnight in Boston, I'm a bit jet lagged. So if I sound sleepy, you should blame my jet lag. Not that I don't want to be an active speaker per se. Now, the title of the talk, we were asked to speak on future of liberal democracy and role of technology and demography. I will stick to the future of liberal democracy and a bit of technology. First, because this topic is so vast, first let me start with an example where democracy and technology meet. In the case of war in Ukraine, I'm sure you all have watched in the news where a son in Ukraine, because there are several million Ukrainians in Russia also. A son in Ukraine calls his father in Russia, saying that now the Russian army has destroyed our house, is destroying our village. The father doesn't believe it. Father says, no, I'm watching Russian television. There the Russian soldiers are treating you very well. They're doing none of this. And the niece talks to her aunt in Russia, saying these things are happening, but the aunt in Russia refused to believe. So you can clearly see, technology does not necessarily mean protection or promotion of democracy. Technology can be used to harm and, in fact, prevent democracy and freedom. Because Russia, Putin has used news media and technology in such a way that Russian people actually believe what the government is telling them. So that's why there's 80% support for, the Ukraine war, and Putin has 80% approval rating. With that, I think Joe Biden could have, could win the in November as well as 2014. So he has more approval rating than American president, or I think any president anywhere in the world. So with this misuse of technology, it raises the issue. If India 2.0 politics, how will India use technology, for or against people, or for or against democracy? Now, with that example in mind, let me first answer this question. Is democracy in decline? The simple answer is yes. Rajdeep ji talked about in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of progress in use of social media in improving democracy. But Freedom House, which comes out with Freedom Index every year, says that freedom has been declining in the world for 16 consecutive years. And also there are many other research has come out saying democracy is regressing for almost 2 decades. Now we all know Samuel Huntington's book, The Third Wave, which showed linear progression of democratic system where more and more countries, from first wave to second wave to third wave, democratic system increased around the world. But in the last 2 decades, it has regressed. Fewer number of countries are adopting democracy. In fact, more number of countries are adopting autocratic system. So clearly in the world now, in the future also, there is a divide between democracy and autocracy. Now, with this clash that's going on, in the autocratic side, China is leading, Russia is leading. And not just what you call China model is considered popular and is being followed by many countries in the Middle East and many countries in Africa. Even few countries in Europe and Asia are trying to emulate Chinese model of what they call autocratic capitalism or development without democracy. So this is a fact. Now, not just they are following or emulating the autocratic system, but they are buying technology from China to repress its own citizens. Like Putin or Russia has successfully misused technology to mislead people in Russia about Ukraine war. Many of these countries are buying technology from China. We know that China is exporting tools like firewall, like facial recognition, and especially social credit system, which are used and manipulated to control its citizens. And all these autocratic governments have formed an alliance of sort now. So this is a fact. So yes, there has been a decline of democracy in the last 2 decades. However, the question is it the end of liberal democracies? Here, I would like to say no, for following reasons. Yes, in the short term, autocratic system might be efficient, but in the long run, it cannot sustain. As the British Lord Acton said in the 19th century, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Look at President Putin of Russia as an example. Absolute power corrupting absolutely. In broad daylight, an independent country is invaded, and Ukrainian people are, humiliated, and Ukraine is destroyed. And as a Tibetan myself, who suffered a lot during and after the occupation of Tibet, I find it a bit, unacceptable. Even though Russia might have security concerns about NATO, but to inflict so much pain and destruction upon Ukrainians with utter disregard to humanity and morality is unbearable. Hence, I will make an argument that war in Ukraine is a turning point in the rejuvenation of democracy and freedom in the world. Now people around the world see what autocratic system can do. Comparatively, democratic system might be inefficient and even messy at times, but in the long run, only democracy protects freedom. Democracy is not an end in itself, but a means to the ultimate end of good and accountable governance. This is true domestically, but increasingly true internationally as well. Because we live in an interdependent world, our fates are interconnected. We know for a fact that what is happening in Ukraine is affecting all of us. Just look at the price of gas and petrol. The idea of economics and trade alone guiding globalization was always a dead end. Similarly, democracy and development are interdependent. Food and freedom are interconnected. One cannot do without the other. The interdependent model is more sustainable in the long run. Now let me conclude with the question, where does India fit in this democracy versus autocracy debate? Compared to China, India follows the model of development with democracy, whereas China makes the argument for development without democracy. So India's success will be a success of democracy. If India fails, it is a win for China. Then not only just in the Middle East and Africa, but even in Asia, including in South Asia, many might follow the Chinese model of democracy, development without democracy. However, the recent development in Pakistan and Sri Lanka indicate that the Chinese model does not necessarily lead to sustainable economy. Finally, for these regions, in Politics 2.0, I recommend that India should reboot to meta era with development with democracy mantra. With the blessings of Lord Buddha and Lord Shiva, it is karmic destiny that democratic model will succeed. Shukriya, Jai Jagat, Jai Bharat, Jai Tibet.
Thank you, Lobsang. You have brought in a very pertinent question to the discussion. The question is, which is the best form of governance? Well, for the last thousands years in particular, maybe more thousands of years back, people have experimented with the best type of governance. The last word about the best type of governance is yet to be written. But as per whatever data and our experience shows over the last 1,000 years, as of now, we think that probably democracy is probably the best form of governance. Maybe it can be, updated in various form. One more question that you have brought in is that participation of the people. That's what Politics 2.0 is all about. I have a data, I will give that to you at a later stage. But think of a country, India, where 1.4 billion people stays, and we have 1.14 billion handset connections, with 33% of the population are into social media, and 47% of our population using internet all over This revolution has started in the last few years. People are now more and more participating. In our country now, say between the age of 16 to 64, 64% of our population is in that range. And they want the country to run on meritocracy. People with merit should come forward. People who are achievers should come forward, take pole position, take leadership position. Now, I'll go back to Priya. She mentioned about Rahul Gandhi coming every morning, giving a tweet, and then, not there to follow it up, has issued a big credibility question on Rahul Gandhi. So obviously, all these will be discussed, and these are food for thought for people to, question us also and the system also. I thank you for your opening remarks. I would now request Ms. Abhinandita to give her opening remarks.
Thank you. First of all, it's an interesting experience to be here. And, while we may be on different sides of things, I think one thing that is important and that we share is that, we are all in a position of power and position of influence in defining the next 20 years of this country. So in that sense, I appreciate this, dialogue between different sides. Coming to the topic, I think, the opening remarks by other speakers summarized the context very well. What I would like to talk about is that, technology is one of the many mediums that politics or business is going to use to reach out. Politics, political revolutions, movements, all that happened even much before technology came in. We fought and won our freedom movement much before technology came in. This is not to deny the role of technology, but emphasize on the substance and the content and what is the need of the hour. What is it that finds resonance? Ultimately, for all of us, the country is important. And whatever medium means it takes to build the India of your dreams will be used by different politicians or administrators and so on. I think that coming to how and what technology can do right now, one interesting thing that I find is that while there is no doubt that a lot of parties use social media really well, so do we, how is that technology used to give back in the form of governance? I can proudly think of an example of our government. And for example, we are a volunteer-driven party. And we used a lot of Facebook, WhatsApp, social media as we were just actually growing. And we are still very young and we're like a startup and growing. But the way that we use technology to come to power and to find that resonance with our voters, for them to accept us as a new entity in politics, Immediately after that, we started working on a scheme which is now fully functioning in Delhi. As an example, is the doorstep delivery of services, where there are about 80, 90 services that, that you can now avail through a click. Now, this is also a use of technology in politics, right? And that you keep the balance. So ultimately, you have to keep coming back to, governance, feeding into politics, feeding into governance, and then you use whatever comes along the way, culture, technology, advertisements, or whatever else. I think that is where, our emphasis is mainly. That, lucky that we actually have an IITian leader. So generally, the relationship with technology is to, is actually deep and is not something that we look as an alien concept that has to be brought in for specific things. It's only natural to use the technology that is available in the world for the larger good. So that is something that, I thought that we should talk about, is that once the parties come to power, how do they then use technology to give back to the people for governance? And, that is the main sort of goal. And I'm restating again that, all of us are on different sides of ideology, or, but I have no doubt that everyone here has some sort of a vision or, dream for in India that absolutely does not discount the fact that, we have to build better schools, hospitals, give to the people, give ration, and so on and so forth. So assuming that basic agenda, let's find ways to actually, enable governance better by using technology. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Mathur. Very well articulated few of the points, and on certain fronts, we must be, magnanimous enough to accept that your party is doing quite well as far as involving the population into the so-called, dialogue and debates in governance. The aspirational India that we talk of sometimes, this aspirational India who wants technology at their fingertips, wants every news in every corner of the world in their fingertips through a smartphone or a mobile, they do not have the time to wait for the next day morning's newspaper. So they do not have the time, they want everything. So we are seeing a generation change which is shifting. Everybody almost 7 hours on the internet, 2.5 to 4 hours, Indian population I'm talking of, on social media platforms and all, taking the time to see their Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So obviously my question to Priyaji is, how does she see the coming generation of politicians handle this change in the political discourse? Will the coming generation of politicians in India adapt to the changes that are taking place through technology?
I think a very good question, Rajdeep. And before I answer, I must compliment you on your anchoring. And if Ram Madhavji and the BJP can spare you NewsX, I think you can. My job is, I will be very worried actually. But having said that, yes, your question is right. How do we do the political discourse in this age where you mentioned some data, even I was reading up, 6 of 10 millennials actually get their news from Facebook, from Twitter, rather than from the old traditional ways. And no one has the time to wait for the newspapers. Yeah, nobody has the time to even now watch that half-an-hour bulletin or an interview over 25 minutes. They want TikTok, they want 2.5, sorry, wrong word, but they want it in 2.5 minutes. They want a very brief version, condensed version. They, it's leading to a attention deficit audience also. They want the headlines, they want it fast, they don't have time to wait for the long version. They want the short version. So then we are stuck in the hands of the, the problem with social media is that all these platforms are owned by big business. So you are, unfortunately, it's not a town hall. Twitter is a town hall, but it is somebody else's town hall. It's not a public space where, everything can be said. They can make it, if they don't want you to hear a story. For instance, I was reading, New York Post had done something on Hunter Biden's deals with that Ukrainian firm. He had given, got payoffs for giving some contract to a Ukrainian firm. When New York Post said we have documents to back this, Facebook just changed the algorithm so it made it very difficult for someone to search the story and to pull up the story on the net. Twitter actually banned New York Post for a day. So when the censorship is in somebody else's hands, how do you work around it? You can say, yes, we can get in a bill, a legislation, but we all know how these legislations really work. And also, which then brings us to the fact that if it's not a public space, then it becomes on your private WhatsApp messaging that use it to distill your information, and that is where there is really no check. So then we had the whole issue of fake news. At least if you post it on a Twitter public post, koi na koi usko fact check karke bata sakta hai. But WhatsApp groups is again a closed bubble, a very much more closed bubble. So how do you do your politics? Twitter and social media technology makes you, the politician, more accessible, but the other edge is that it makes us, the audience, the viewer, the public, more gullible. So we need to be also on more of an alert. It's a double-edged sword, really.
Interesting thing you have brought out, actually. Being a modern generation politician and all, being a professional, being in medical practice, then all of a sudden pushed into politics, I realized there needs to be a connect between, direct communication between your voters and yourself. Whatever be your agenda, you should have platforms to express it and get ideas, and you should be open to criticism. Taking on from what you have said, I'll give a small example of a personal experience that I experienced actually last 3-4 days back. Was I come from a place in South Assam where all of a sudden in the North Kachar hills of Assam there was cloudburst and there was a lot of floods and all. 4 districts of Assam were inundated and all. And along with those inundation, there was landslide. The major road connection between Guwahati to Silchar was cut off through Meghalaya. And the train connection that was there, that was established in 2014, was also gone in the landslide. So what happened practically in my constituency was, there was no connection between Silchar and Guwahati by road or rail. The only connectivity that was left was air connectivity. And the next very day, what happened is that for this distance of 300 kilometers, 25 minutes air flight, the charges of air tickets went up somewhere between 31,000 to 36,000. So can you believe this and all this happened? People started messaging me, texting me. So what I did is, 3 to 4 days back, I just tweeted that astonishing work by the airlines, the private players and all. For a 25-minute, 300-kilometer flight, the tickets have gone up to 31,000. Mr. Scindia will be here in the evening in this platform. I take this opportunity to compliment him. He looked into the tweet, passed on instruction to all the airlines so that there was a capping for 15 days. The previous price needs to stay. So that he implemented very smartly and very positively on a very proactive this thing. So what happened, this is what governance actually does through social media. But one of them that what happened, the next very day, the Chief Minister of Assam, Dr. Himanta Biswa Sharma, called on a cabinet meeting and he asked some airlines to give some special flights and he kept the price of the air tickets between Silchar and Guwahati at 3,000 rupees. So 72-seater ATR, 2 flights in a day, so at least 144 people who could go on an emergency. So this is the influence of social media, and all these happened within 48 hours. So this is what the social media is coming to. I would ask a question to Lopse, that he comes from Tibet and all. We know Tibet is a closed community. The access of outer world is not there because of all political. I would not like to go into the political side of it. I'd like to ask, what is the internet is banned, we know there. What is the situation like? What is the situation as far as the new generation is concerned? Do they have news of what is happening in the world? Do they want to come out of it and share whatever is going on in the world? What is his thought on social media in present day Tibet?
As I give you an example about Russia and Ukraine, China follows their strategy or policy of 100 and 0 as far as Tibet is concerned, in China in general, which means they will share 100% of the information with the outside world, but they will let only 0% of the information from outside world to come in. So that's the 0 and 100 kind of a strategy. For example, CGTN, Chinese government television network, the English CGTN, okay? On Facebook, just check Facebook, they have 120 plus million followers, Chinese government television network in English language. Now you check BBC Facebook, has around 50 or 60 million. CNN has 30-some million. Al Jazeera English has 10 or 15 million. Together, BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera has less number of subscribers in English language and Facebook than Chinese government television, right? So, but Facebook is banned in China. So we are talking about 120 million English subscribers from around the world are watching Chinese government television more than BBC and CNN and Al Jazeera. So they are using social media technology to share their information, 100% of the information, rest of the world, but they will allow only 0% inside, because you want to convey a text or send a message inside Tibet now, you can't. It's banned. So, this is how they use things. So it's, the way the Chinese government is using, I just give you CGTN, CGTN French, CGTN Russian, CGTN Spanish are very, very popular, right? But they are banned it inside China and inside Tibet as well. So that's why it's, that's why when I talked about autocratic system and democratic system, the challenge before the world is very real, very real. If you follow the autocratic model, all these autocrats, they want to use this technology and medium which China is exporting and control the whole narrative and communication. So this is a dangerous trend, and we have to be very careful about. So inside Tibet, situation is quite severe, and getting information inside Tibet is very difficult.
Thank you on this. Ms. Mathur, I would like to ask a very simple question to you. The India is getting slowly and slowly urbanized. Delhi is being almost like an urban state. Do you see any change in technology users amongst the urban population and rural population? Whether the people in rural areas, are they using the social media handles and all, like Facebook and Twitter and other things, and how they are connected with their politicians, your party or maybe otherwise also? Free to comment on that. Just a second, sir. We'll take questions from the audience. We still have 25 minutes left. We'll take questions from the audience after this.
Yes, obviously there is a shift in, or there is an increase in use of technology, both in the urban, I would call it now, market, and the rural market. With the democratization of technology, media, business spreading to different parts of the country, obviously there is an increase. What we do with that technology is complex, and what we are doing with it is, can be problematic and so on, but I think that there is no doubt that there is a huge increase in the use of technology. Within that, of course, there are layers and layers of, and dynamics. For example, what is women's access to technology? What are, now in the time where, mobile phones, everybody aspires for a TikTok or a Facebook account and so on, and want to, have the liberty to actually to broadcast themselves. So on one hand, you're also bombarded with a one-way propaganda. And on the other hand, you're also able to actually now express yourself and, broadcast your own thoughts. I think there is a lot of inequality in this at the moment. So there is no doubt that technology is catching up. That rural India is catching up. But I hope that we can not just look at it as a market, make sure that it does not just become a rural market and an urban market, but actually find a very natural use for this.
Why I asked you this question is, the people from rural areas, this thing, are also more interested in all platforms. It's a general trend, and the statistics also show that, actually. I asked you because, like, being from Delhi, what is the trend? But in the entire country today, the aspirational India, as I said, and all, even the rural young people from the rural areas are also getting connected through net too, and they are getting all information all across the world. And all. Anyway, we'll open up the floor. Anyone, Ria, the lady there? Can anyone help her with the mic? I would request you to ask a question and be specific to the panelist, and keep, we have 17, 18 minutes, so we'll keep, at least take 3 or 4 questions.
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Subhi Chaturvedi, and thank you for the excellent moderation. To Lopse, I just wanted to thank you for being our moral compass and our North Star. What you spoke was truly music to my ears. My question is to Ms. Mathur. We've seen the rise and the fall of Seva Dal, and the question we're debating today in front of the House is Politics 2.0. It's only appropriate that, the role of the Sangathan is not be known to anybody. We've seen Samarpan, Seva, there's an ideology at play. And the entire gestation of the Aam Aadmi Party is something, as a student of law, media, society, I've watched very carefully. One would not like to write off, as was spoken earlier, and a strong opposition and strong dissent makes for the pluralism that our country is. I'd love for you to speak more as to how you're building this structure of the volunteer network that you briefly spoke about. And is this also the understanding from the outside that there's only one voice? Could you speak more to democracy and just the rise of the volunteer to more strategic roles in the party? How does that work? And what is the ideology at play? Because there have been barbs and there have been questions around that too. Thank you.
Thanks. We have only one ideology, actually, which is to make this country truly good, equal, #1 in the world in terms of, what our people are, and, what the future entails, and so on. So the ideology is truly to make India the #1 country in a real sense, reach every corner of the country and make it what it should be, give back to the people, or have a healthy governance for political system. That is one about ideology. The other about, how volunteers are mobilized, etc. We also use technology and so on. It has actually, because we are really like a startup, and the fact that people like me who had nothing to do with politics, we had nothing to do with, our families didn't have much to do with politics and so on, are here and representing the party or making the party is, should answer the other question about having only one voice and all that. Otherwise, we just take, our model is to actually work and then take our model to different parts of the country, and it resonates, and that's been working okay, even though we have very little resources.
Thank you. The second questions come from the gentleman in the front row.
Thank you very much for organizing the session very well. My name is Shrikant. I teach in the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Since 2001, Indian government had promoted democracy in South Asia. Since September 2014, Prime Minister Modi's visit to Tokyo, the Indian government stated that it would support democracy movements abroad. This is the first time we expanded the envelope. And coinciding with this, we have the UN Democracy Fund, increase in the funding has been taken. My question to Dr. Lobsang Sangay is, sir, you have been the Prime Minister in exile for Tibet for 2 consecutive terms, and we noticed that 80 to 88% of the people participated in these elections. quite a very high participation compared to even rest of India in the general elections. My question is, what needs to be done in terms of the delivery of goods and services to the people, and also participation of the people in terms of those numbers, in your experience?
In South Asia or in the Tibetan community?
Both in South Asia as well as for the rest of the world, in a way.
I feel actually, the following Korean model or Brazilian model to give, holiday on the day of the election, that you don't have to go to work, and you get a point, social points. And if you don't vote, you get negative points. If you vote, you get positive points. So that's why Brazil and Korea always have more than 80, 90% number of people turning out to vote. So if you really want to take it seriously, maybe that might be one way of encouraging people to do it. As far as Tibetans are concerned, because it's a freedom struggle, not only we take participation in election and high percentage, but actually to vote in the Tibetan election, you must pay freedom tax. If you have not paid freedom tax, you're not allowed to vote. So this whole the Boston Tea Party voter the no taxation without representation is flipped in the Tibetan context. You pay, then only you vote. So that's very unique. So we are very proud that our voter participation is very high, mainly because it's a freedom struggle. But for rest of the world, I think maybe Brazilian and Korean model of giving holiday and social points might be a one way to go about it.
One more question we'll take from the gentleman there. Yeah. This is the last question. We have the minister already for the next session. Mr. Puri.
I think the coming Politics 2.0 will work a lot depending on how the mass media, electronic media and social media works. The influence of electronic media has been elaborated by Lepsang. Priya talked a little about the control of what you want to hear and what you want to read. But it's much more than that. It is mind control. It is mind conditioning. It is not just what you want to see. They throw upon you with the use of AI what you don't even want to see. So slowly your mind is conditioned and your thought process are conditioned before you even realize. Cambridge Analytica, everybody knows. So how far this will go and how would people's independence of thinking will be affected by this particular control of social media over the human mind? That is very important unless that is fought, that is understood. And as Rajdeep ji said, talking directly to the electorate, that is another point that is very important. So how far can we control the social media or the AI-made control of the human mind and the voter's mind? That is point one. Point two, I read a news about women in Australia coming together, forming a group called TEAL, your Tea Party kind. And they have made candidates in the election to fight the conventional politicians. That is something what AAP did some times back, but slowly converted to typical political party. So these kind of movements also will affect the coming of the Politics 2.0. So Lepsang's view on this mass media, the social media control of the mind and how to overcome that, and to you about people's movement in India then getting converted to very normal pedestrian political movements. Thank you.
I think it's more comment. I think, unfortunately, the social media is owned and run by multinational companies and is privatized. So profit, influences how you use social media, So unfortunately, we thought the earth is flat. Now social media has come. Knowledge is in your smartphone. Actually, smartphone is not so smart if it's controlled by your government, So this is the reality. Now the government and private sector have to, fight it out. And there has to be some balance as to how you use or misuse, technology and platforms. So this is a major debate. I think that needs another, another panel. So with that, I would like to thank Rajdeep ji and everybody, my panelists, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Lopsang ji. So here we are almost at the end. The closing remark is very simple. It is almost like a single line. that politics 2.0 will be more tech-driven, it will be more open, it will be a data-oriented issue where everything will be a both-way communication. It will not be a top-down approach, it will also be a bottom-up approach. Whatever data you have to analyze. The smart politician or the smart political party or the smart political conglomerate would be that party who will analyze those data, go into dissection of those data, and then implement those data in effective policy making. So that, I think, will be the future of politics 2.0. I would like to thank all my esteemed panelists for being so forthright, and I thank the audience for being so cooperative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panel, for such an exciting and relevant conversation. Sir, may I please request you to felicitate our panel before we move on to the next session? A huge round of applause for all of them, please. May I now request Smita Barua to please come up on stage and felicitate our moderator, Mr. Rajdeep Roy. And after Politics 2.0, we'll be moving on to Commerce and Industry 2.0 very shortly. So please stay at your seats, and you'll see our next moderator and person to take us forward. It'll be very exciting. Thank you so much.
Hello folks, good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the 7th India Ideas Conclave. We had a great evening yesterday. We now begin with the second session of the day, which is a presentation session on Commerce and Industry 2.0. This session will bring together 4 highly distinguished speakers who will address us for about 12 to 15 minutes, followed by an audience interaction for 5 minutes. Before that, it will be an honor to listen to the Honorable Union Minister for Housing, Urban Development, Petroleum and Natural Gas, Shri Hardeep Singh Puri. I request General Arun Sahani to escort the Honorable Minister on the stage.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Without much ado, I'm going to request the Honorable Minister to share his views on the subject. You're welcome, sir. You'd like to stand there? Or you?
Ram Madhav ji, I see many friends at this India Foundation event, and I'm very grateful to be invited to share some thoughts with you at this 7th India Ideas Conclave. I believe this session is on commerce and industry, commerce and trade 2.0. The current multilateral system which governs the, and I see a lot of veterans sitting here who have worked on that system, was essentially designed in the aftermath of the Second World War in order to provide economic stability and growth. And the political system was, of course, designed to ensure that the world is saved from the scourge of another world war. Those institutions, the Bretton Woods Institution, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and the WTO, which followed, I believe served a purpose. Many of us would applaud the economic growth that took place within that framework. But then along came a pandemic, which was unlike SARS or Ebola or H1N1. This was a pandemic which reminded you of what happened in the case of the Spanish flu at the beginning of the 20th century. And all talk of free trade, supply lines being opened, and all these transactions anchored in the rule of law suddenly became question marks. Why do I say this? Well, if you built up a health sector which was dependent on certain supply chains, and those supply chains either got disrupted or suddenly disappeared, you had to fend for yourselves. Of course, in India, which had witnessed the dismantling of the vaccine production during the years between 2004 and 14, we had the entrepreneurial skills, political resolve, and the ability to slowly get started on the healthcare sector, and that we ended up producing nearly 2 billion doses of vaccines which were administered to our countrymen almost free of cost, and we exported to the world as good citizens. But other countries were not able to do it. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I believe in our quest for strategic, preferential, and reciprocal trade relationships, and I'm choosing my words very carefully. If you were schooled in the Geneva School of International Trade, and I mean the GATT WTO, then you know words like reciprocal, preferential, strategic are always circumscribed, because they are supposed to be part, if I extend a concession to you, then both of us have to extend it on an MFN basis to the rest of the world, and so on. But suddenly when, forgive my use of language, when all hell broke loose, you had to fend for yourselves. And therefore, I believe that the endeavor to seek strategic, preferential, and reciprocal trade relationship for the sheer sake of survival in a difficult set of circumstances, whether it is semiconductors, solar panels, vaccines, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and telecom equipment, I think that became something which I personally believe is captured in our spirit of Atma Nirbharta, but is also very central to the economic and trade growth that is taking place now, for which I applaud those who are responsible. The figures I saw yesterday, the increase in foreign direct investment I believe is 20 times over the representative period, something like $84 billion, which is, and this is in dollar terms, significant. I just met a colleague who says that he was in Silicon Valley the other day, and there's a lot of interest in India. I'm not surprised. I also believe India today, following that pandemic, has emerged as a much stronger player in the international community on international trade and economic exchanges. I believe that the target of a $5 trillion economy by 2025 or a $10 trillion economy by 2030 is not only achievable, but we will get there before time. For those of you who have known me, you can perhaps be a little dismissive and say, this guy is always upbeat, always bullish on India and slightly over-optimistic. No, I have good reason to tell you why I think that. And let me share a few statistics with you on areas which you might think I am reluctant to talk about. Let me talk about energy security for a minute. Do you have any idea how many people go to the petrol bunk every morning to fill up? Just a guess. Let me tell you, 6 crore or 60 million people. 60 million people go to a petrol pump every day to fill up their vehicles, whether two-wheeler, three-wheeler, or four-wheelers. Our daily consumption is 5 million barrels a day, which is 1.8 billion barrels a year. I make the submission to you that in the next 10 to 20 years, India will be the critical driver of demand in the energy sector. That in and of itself is, I think, a strong statement. But if I tell you what the Modi government has done in order to be able to meet that, we have a problem in the short run. I have friends from the United States sitting here. I have others. Let me tell you, a global economy on the basis of $110 a barrel oil is not sustainable. That we are not looking at just inflationary situations. In the United States, 50 years high, steepest fall in living standards in the United Kingdom. Countries around India, I don't like to name countries, but I think they suggest themselves. Sri Lanka, Nepal, other countries, Pakistan, deep trouble. That's not confined to South Asia, other countries. And yet India, thanks to the very strong political leadership and farsightedness of our people, there is no energy shortage here. We are increasing our biofuels blending, where we were at 1.4% when the Modi government came in. And I have some personal knowledge because I was ambassador to Brazil. We have taken it up from 1.4%. I think yesterday we have hit 10% already. And the target of 20% ethanol or biofuel blending, which was our target till 2030, we will achieve it in 2025. Our exploration and production, which in spite of big talk over the last several decades, had remained constant at around 7%. Not many of you know that out of the 3.5 million square kilometers of sediment area, a basin, we were only exploiting, as I said, 6 to 7%. We are taking that to 10, 15% and beyond. We've doubled the oil exploration in the northeast of the country. Yes, these are difficult times, but India will navigate through those difficult times, and India will ensure energy security. I am hesitant to use the word affordability too easily these days because, you know, when petrol prices are what they are. But it is with a degree of confidence that we can say that our refining capacity, which currently is about 250 million tons per annum, is being taken up to 400 million tons per annum before too long. We will not only supply India's needs, we will also supply the needs of a large number of other countries. This, I believe, is Atmanirbharta. Let me also share with you that even when there was a degree of skepticism that Atmanirbharta meant that we were going to be inward-looking, I was one of those who said, listen, you can't be outward-looking till you've sorted out your own internal system of exchanges. And I think we did that reasonably well. So if exports are booming, Mr. Subramaniam and his boss can get the credit, but we all rejoice in that. Equally, let me say that we have developed a certain overall confidence in the system, and that our partners elsewhere, if your foreign direct investment in the fiscal year 21-22 have gone up to $84 billion, there is something to be said for that. And equally, I believe, and here I want to choose my words carefully, I still believe, and I'm one of those who says this loud and clear, we are still not fully exploiting that enormous human and economic potential that we possess as a country. And I think we are on the path of being able to do so. I don't want to go over the big ticket policy reforms that have taken place, GST, IBC, asset monetization, labor law reforms, production-linked incentives, the IT service industry having been doubled in size, the fact that the International Monetary Fund forecasts our growth at 8.2% for 22-23, the fact that GST collection in the month of April was 1.68 lakh crores, and that we had record merchandise exports of 38.19 billion, all those speak for themselves. But since I'm in this beautiful city of Bengaluru, I'm a little partial for a number of reasons which are personal. All I can say is that the government's efforts in promoting entrepreneurship, which have been evidenced through the flagship missions, process reform, and ecosystem effects, and for which 16 January has been designated National Startup Day to take startup culture to the far-flung areas of the country. But here the figures are most impressive. Between 2011 and 2014, we created only one unicorn every year. This figure rose from 2015 onwards. We had 4 new unicorns in 2015, 8 new in 2018, 9 new unicorns in 2019, 10 in 2020, and a whopping 44 new unicorns in 2021. Now that is a figure I believe anyone, anywhere in the world could cite with a degree of satisfaction and pointing in a direction where if you get 44 in a year, and the PwC estimates that 50 startups may have the potential to become unicorns in 2020. So there is something out there, a spirit of innovation, a spirit, an entrepreneurial spirit, which I think encapsulates a certain, fire in the belly. I don't know whether it's correct for me to cite that as an example. Technology as an enabler. Before 2014, it was impossible to think that the Indian government would embrace innovation in public schemes and mission. I can tell you now with a degree of confidence that the 2 ministries I have the privilege of dealing with, I sometimes have to work a little harder to keep up with the technology we are introducing there. Most of us have dashboards on our tables where we can monitor the project implementation. And I mean, literally with the help of technology, find out how many workers are on site, how many there, what exactly is happening. Now, this was unheard of earlier. The government is not only a facilitator of technology, but the government is a major user. And the government is also putting pressure on itself in order to upgrade technology use. Aadhaar to financial inclusion, to mobile, to broadband, to geotagging. Just now, before coming here, I had the privilege of watching another technology quantum jump potential. And I was very forthright in saying I'd like to see this kind of presentation made to my 2 ministries, both to the OMCs, in other words. In other words, we are ready at any point of time to embrace all the latest that becomes available in innovation and technology. I want to compliment India Foundation for an event of this nature, which brings in not only latest breakthroughs in technology, an event which also facilitates the power of ideas coming from different directions for a cross-fertilization of those ideas to see how technology and those ideas can merge in order to be able to achieve the overall gains that we seek, both as a country for our citizens and as responsible citizens of the world, which we can export outside. You know, I don't know, I think I've probably got a minute to go to there, so I'm going to conclude. I'm a student of history, and I draw valuable lessons from history. One of the lessons I learned was that in the year, some years ago, a Cambridge historian, Angus Maddison, said that India's GDP in the year 1700 or thereabouts represented 27% of global GDP. Yeah. I don't want to take a political pot shot at the phase of colonialism, but the census that the figures we have for 1951 show that that 27% of global share had come down to 3 or 4%. We are up again, but I think I remind myself, and one of my colleagues has written a brilliant book, that whilst we were exporting wheat, by the way, we are still exporting wheat, so let's not have any misunderstanding on that. It's just that when you are in a slight period of turmoil and your open exports can result in, you know, unregulated problems and so we will continue to export wheat, there's no issue. But in the year of the Lord, 1942-43, when all the wheat grown in India was diverted to the war effort by the colonial master, we had a situation during the famine of Bengal where 10 million people died. It was that scorched earth policy which led to very serious position, we can call it a genocide, 10 million people dying. Fortunately, when you are in charge of your own decision making, and that sovereign decision making is in the hands of somebody who has both the political strength, the visionary statesmanship of our present Prime Minister, you will make sure that you will not only grow for the sake of goods and services to be delivered in your own country, but as a responsible member of the international community. And our vaccine story, I think, beautifully encapsulates that. We were able to provide vaccines throughout the world, and we will continue to discharge that responsibility. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop here, and of course, I'd be happy to take a few questions, should you have any.
Sir, thank you very much. Absolutely very frank, forthright, and as always, a pleasure to hear the optimism about the way our country is moving ahead. Sir, we'll just take 2 questions, if you permit.
I can come here?
Yeah, please, sir. Gentlemen, for the sake of time, we'll take 2 questions from the audience, one from the right side, one from the left. Any takers, please?
Hello.
I like the way you said right first and left later.
No, but we'll keep the gender balance in that, sir.
Excuse me.
Yeah, please.
May I?
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, General. Couple of questions to the Minister. Minister, you talk about the WTO trade regime, but there have been a number of regional trade agreements, RTAs and FTAs. So isn't the MFN status honored really more in the breach than in the observance? And secondly, you talk about petroleum and energy crisis. I mean, doesn't the whole issue of energy crisis really get back to the issue of renewable energy and where rare earths become quite important? Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. On the issue of the erosion of the MFN principle, I think Ashok sitting there and Mr. Subramaniam and several of us could have an independent session on that. The MFN principle, along with the national treatment principle, Articles 1 and 3 of the old GATT or the WTO, these are the motherhood and apple pie basis of what the international trading system or multilateral system is all about. It was absolutely clear, and I'm sorry, I can afford to be a bit of a critic. You know, it's all very good to talk about free trade rules of the GATT and WTO, and comparative advantage. But very early in the life of those organizations, people started deviating from those free trade principles and motherhood and apple pie because it didn't suit their interest. I mean, the first deviation I am aware of, which led to an abrogation from the free trade rules, was the trade in textiles and clothing. Because they wanted to maybe keep Japan under check, I don't know what it was, but they decided that you could, in fact, deviate from the free trade rules and have a system based on quotas, which you would negotiate as a kind of a barter. And in that negotiation, obviously, the dominant partner had a this thing. So you did it in the case of textiles, the international community accepted it. And then, of course, you came along saying, we will have regional and free trade agreements amongst first plurilateral, then a number of countries. Now, the rules are all right. I mean, the rules are that if you are entering into an Article 24 arrangement, which deals with customs union and free trade agreement, you are expected over a period of time to extend the benefits of that arrangement to other countries also. But the models which have developed, I mean, I don't think anybody is losing any sleep. And I think the gentleman who asked the question is absolutely right. Nobody is losing any sleep on whether the MFN principle is being eroded. I mean, I have not heard any serious writing on that. We take that as a given. But the fact is, if the world is entering into those arrangements, so will we. I mean, everybody's entered into those arrangements. So if you want to get on in life, if you have the means and you have the negotiating this thing, you will. Because trade through those arrangements comes in at preferential terms. But you will have to make sure that you negotiate good arrangements, not those where there is a violation of the rules of origin, etc., and you end up finding, I mean, much of what happened in the United States at a particular time that I used to live there was that it was being blamed on the, free trade agreements following the latest round of trade negotiation. But that's a political discussion. But I agree with you. Free trade agreements or limited membership agreements are here to stay, and nobody is going to say, I will not enter into them because there is a dilution of the MFN principle. I don't see that happening. So I totally agree with you. What was the question on petrol? I'm sorry, there was a second question on
Could you just say that again, please?
Thank you, sir. Minister, my question was that we talk about renewable energy.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And rare earths.
Sure, no, I got it. Minister. Well, sure sign of growing old that whilst I was answering your first one, I forgot what the second one. No, look, I started by saying one of the good things that has happened in India, really creditable achievements, is that today the government, led by the Honorable Prime Minister, is looking at all those other renewable sectors. I can go on to tell you what we've done in solar. I can tell you what we are doing in a big way on green hydrogen. In fact, I just shot off a letter yesterday. Just I gave you one statistic, 60 million people to go to fill up. Do you know my oil companies have already plans to put up 22,000 electric vehicle charging stations on our pump. And I'm told that they're increasing it by 30%. So you have it's a chicken and egg thing. If you have the electric charging stations, you'll also get more electric cars. You will get electric cars only if there are charging stations. So whether it is green hydrogen, in electric vehicles, if the grid is gray, then you can say you're not totally green. But you're absolutely correct. Whether it is solar, wind, all the renewable energy, that is the future. But I want to conclude with the slightly sobering thought. Everybody talks about, and it's very fashionable to talk about transition to sustainable and green energy. But my friends, you have to transition from where you are to where you are going. Unless you are able to provide energy to your citizens, and that energy today is essentially based on the traditional energy. But we are moving, gas we are moving from 6 to 15%, other areas we are moving. So yes, the transition from our side is very good. I must tell you, I am one of those who was immensely impressed, but I was also slightly surprised when the Prime Minister went to Glasgow and he decided, as he did once on an earlier occasion when he went to Paris for COP, he decided in a very bold manner to go ahead and change what was perceived as India's traditional position. He made it much more forward-looking as a responsible statement. So net zero, 50% coming from renewables, etc. These are all very bold and ambitious plans.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Last question, please.
My name is Neetu Garg, sir, and thanks for giving us the recap of achievements. While it's a milestone having 100 unicorns in India, but are we taking track of future of these startups as well? I myself is part of world's largest IT industry from last 2 decades, and I am aware of sizable layoff, shortage of skilled people, uncertainty of profitability, which is reducing day by day, and the cash burn. So how we are planning to have the sustainability for these unicorn pool, as well as adding new inside the India?
I must confess, I may not be the correct person to answer that question. But my strong belief is that it is not the government's job to worry about that worry. If you are capable of becoming a unicorn, you're more than capable of looking after what is available. And after all, it is that power of the idea, the power of entrepreneurial talent, which has resulted in that entity becoming a unicorn. And I think they will take care of that. What the government can do is the government can provide a benign and supportive ecosystem. And I believe the government is doing that. Equally, I believe the movement in the direction. We know you have a demographic dividend, but that demographic dividend begins to pay off with developments of this kind. So I'm very upbeat on this. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And we'll come to the conclusion of the session. A big round of applause for the Minister. And thank you very much, sir, for such a small presentation. Just request you for a minute.
May I now request Arunji to please felicitate the Honorable Minister?
We have with us the Commerce Secretary in the Government of India, Shri BVR Subramaniam. May I request Shri Subramaniam to address the conference?
Morning, friends. Firstly, thank India Foundation for having invited me to address this gathering. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you and in this lovely city. It's a very vast topic, industry and commerce, and it's India 2.0, rebooting for the meta era. And as speakers, when we were invited here, we were generally given the broad set of issues that we should address when we are doing this 10-15-minute talk. And I refer to the last question, The last question which is given to us, what could horribly go wrong, not just in India, but for the global economy in the next 25 years? And I'll quote the example which happened yesterday. My flight landed at 3 a.m. It should have landed at 11. That was because of a terrible storm in Delhi yesterday, because of which half the flights in the evening after 7 o'clock didn't land or take off. Well, you could attribute it to climate change. And I can say, Delhi has been seeing temperatures of 49 degrees. You've had a problem with the wheat crop in northwestern part of India. So if actually whatever we project in the next 25 years, if there are things that can go wrong, this is going to be one. So, and that just struck my mind. Here I am going to talk to all of you on this topic. And they said, what can go wrong? And one of the threats on the horizon, if we don't address it, is climate change. And I'm very happy that our government is actually quite committed to addressing this problem. We are talking about this agenda, about, rebooting to the meta era. We were trying to look at what India is going to be like 25 years from now. It's actually very opportune, because I think that's exactly what the Prime Minister is also thinking. He's making the entire political class, the entire government, and the entire country and the people work on a vision and a strategy and a roadmap to actually delineate what India should be 25 years from now, not just an aspirational goal, but a goal which we will go ahead and achieve. And I think, in a way, this conference and things like this feed into that general thought process. And this is such a mega exercise that's going on that it'll be amazing if actually one day somebody actually writes about it. Because it's an intense discussion, debate going on between ministers, members of parliament, bureaucrats, public, industry associations. So I think it's a vast exercise. So I'll just try to address it in a thematic way. I'll actually talk about where India is going to be, or what we hope India will be 25 years from now. That's the meta era we are talking about. What are the global trends that are going to be relevant to us for these 25 years? Or what should actually guide our thinking? What will our workplaces look like in this coming years, coming decades? What's going to happen to supply chains in the coming years? What's going to be the impact of technology, not only on our business models, but what can be the unintended consequences of technology we should be careful about? And of course, the last question, which is what can go wrong in spite of our best efforts, and what we should be alert to. As Minister before me has said, he talked about a 5 trillion economy in a couple of years, which is quite nearby actually. We are already $3 trillion. We just crossed that a month ago or so. And we are already, just in the top 5. All projections say that by 2047, which is 100 years from our independence, India will be anywhere between $30 to $40 trillion in real terms, not nominal terms. That's something which is actually unimaginable. When we sit around a table and try to get a handle on that number, $30 trillion is more than any economy today in the world. That's something which I personally believe is incomprehensible to most people. This is something which, great thinkers, strategists, etc., particularly those who do scenario planning, can visualize. But it's actually to get it ingrained into our thinking, and we face it. When we try to project something 25 years, we end up with schemes. Schemes are for 3 years, 5 years. It's going to be a top economy. We'll be probably the second, if not the first, or the largest economy in the world at that time, 25 years from now. And I say that with confidence. If we stick to the path, we stick to the high growth path, which we are all working for, we'll be there. We'll be a top manufacturing nation with about $10 trillion coming out of manufacturing. We'll be a top trading nation with about $10 trillion of exports actually from India. 10 trillion. This year we were all, crying from the rooftops that we did about $421 billion of goods and about $250 billion of services. That's $670 billion. That's a record. We have broken out of a $500 billion barrier which we were stuck with for the last 10 years or so. But 600 billion on one side, and we're talking of 10 trillion. 20 years from now. Are we actually geared to do all that? So these are the things that are going on in people's minds. I think there are going to be plans on restructuring government, rebooting the government, in fact, actually building it up from scratch, from zero line, and build the whole structure. Because whatever we see as institutional designs and architecture today was designed 50 years ago, 60 years ago with tinkering at the edges. We need new structures, new organizations, new methods of working, new rules, new regulations, if we have to be a country of that size. I think every Indian, every person who's involved in this country and its welfare should start thinking in those directions. What are the big trends that are going to affect industry and commerce, and I'll try to actually restrict myself to that. One we saw just now, which was, COVID. It has changed the way we work. Work from home has become a norm. Companies are finding it difficult to push employees back into work. So actually people are talking about 20%, 30% employees by rotation, 2 days a week, this is the kind of stuff. And from that has emerged this huge thing, and I just saw a demonstration outside. You're going to have virtual platforms, people are working on Zoom. I mean, government always loved meetings because it also meant travel. I mean, it just got out. We are all doing VCs now, and now it's become a habit. You are rarely called for real meetings, physical meetings. And virtual has become real now, and efficiency has increased. You do 6 meetings a day rather than just, 1 or 2 a week. So that's the kind of efficiency that has come into government decision making. The other thing which is a trend which is happening is technology entering production in a massive way. Be it 3D printing, be it artificial intelligence, and a whole host of ways in which things can be done. And I'll actually explain how these are actually going to be working through the entire economy and the production systems. Climate change is there over the horizon. And I think that's something that's going to be a big, big theme over the next 25 years. And industry and commerce will have to keep thinking about it. We'll have to go for low carbon, no carbon growth, carbon neutral growth, and we'll be talking about clean mobility, we'll be talking about green energy. These are going to be mainstream topics of discussion in boardrooms, in companies, in individual homes. I think that's important. One of the things that has actually come out thanks to COVID is the vulnerability of supply chains. Globalization was the buzzword since the Uruguay round. For the last 30 years, the world was talking, become global, become global, become global. And actually, the world's entire production process. I was told by the Canadian High Commissioner, we're negotiating an FTA with Canada, and the Canadian High Commissioner said that a car that is actually produced either in Detroit or Toronto crosses the US and Canada border 7 times. You make the engine somewhere, it goes across, it's fixed on a chassis, goes back, then you fix the body, then it goes to the other side, then the fittings are fixed. That's it. It's seamless movement. But that's okay between US and Canada. But if you look at computers, they actually go across 8 countries over long distances, China, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, and a couple of other places, and finally get shipped from Singapore. Now, suddenly COVID has shown the vulnerability of countries and particularly production lines and service sector when you have such integrated global supply chains. Either because of the pandemic or because of restrictive policies of some countries, these supply chains are vulnerable, and I think this is going to be a strong theme in the future. Countries would like to ship production, if not home, to closer to home. Ship production to countries which are friendly, which are partners, which are not going to act inimically in times of trouble. And I think that's come heavily into people's minds. And I think that's very, very important. The other thing that's happening is globalization of services. Actually, COVID was good time for anybody who did services on the digital mode. Instead of people, outsourcing and work from home, all actually gel very, very strongly. And it's not just foreign companies, but Indian companies also went into that. And I think that's very, very significant because it's going to lead to a cascading effect in more and more sectors. And that leads to the other thing, that as technology is improving, as digitalization is happening around the world and even in India more and more, non-tradables are increasingly become hyper-tradable. And I'm sure you can't have a haircut which is a service across the world, but there could be many, many other services which will be delivered much more than they were in the past. And I think that's going to become a dominant trend in future. The other important thing is we think of services and manufacturing as 2 different activities. Actually, there's a new concept which is going around, which is called servicification of manufacturing. So when you actually buy a product, there are a whole host of services which are embedded in it. The logistics, the marketing, the branding, a whole host of services, financial services are embedded in the final product which you're buying. So actually services and manufacturing are merging as we go along. So this distinction between goods and services is going to be a very, very artificial one. If you liberalize goods, you will end up liberalizing services or will have to do it. So I think that's another trend which we will see. And also, because of what you're seeing currently, the sudden boom in commodity prices, everything, there is going to be an increasing emphasis on the circular economy. Things like conservation, reuse, efficiency of use of material is going to be a common theme as we go into the future. And last, 2 other things, and that's something we often forget when we plan, is what is going to happen to the world's population. You just saw the National Family Health Survey which came out a couple of days ago. India has actually crossed the tipping point. Our 2.0 is our, whatever rate it is. And that's less than 2.1, which is the basic rate that is required to sustain the current population. I mean, it's actually happened faster than we think. It's happened because of literacy, it happened because of incomes, it has happened because of employment. So I think the world is very near that point where population will not grow, and many countries, including neighbors, are going to see a population decline. And even in India, I think that's going to be a very important thing come another 20 years. And I think that's something which all industry has to keep in mind as we go forward into the future, because it means two things. You have an aging world. So you won't have young people playing with tech, you will have very old people playing with tech. You know, you will have things done not sitting on the floor, but sitting on things which are actually going to be high because the old people can't sit. So there has to be a changing consumption patterns will happen as populations age. You see what Japan was doing 50 years ago and what they consume now. I'll give you a good example of what aging populations do. So I think that's important. How will this impact workplace? I think that's one of the things I was asked to address, and I thought I'll do that. Firstly, they are going to become increasingly unrecognizable. You know, my department, I'm Commerce Secretary, we run the SCZs across the country. Bangalore has tons of them. The biggest problem that developers are having tasted blood. The units there who are actually happy doing work from home don't want to send their employees back in, which basically means the demand for real estate is going to fall. You know, companies are going to live with 1/3 or 1/4 of the real estate they needed in the past. These trends are going to accelerate. Maybe the current guys can be forced to go back, but new guys will say, hey, I only need 1/3, square foot area, which I needed a year ago or so. I think that's important. They're going to be extremely important is distributed locations of manufacturing. Thanks to 3D printing, thanks to the way technology is going to disrupt manufacturing. You know, how did we go? Long ago, we made one shoe by a cobbler for an individual, very customized. We have moved from that, thanks to Henry Ford and Taylor, into mass production. I think we are going to go back because of distributed production to heavily customized and heavily industrialized production. So, each individual can order a suit which will be tailored to him virtually from a mass retailer, and it will come to you. You'll actually buy a car in which every component you will select and somebody will assemble it in some location, it will get to you. So it's not just going to be just in time, it's going to be just for you. And more important, it will be just from a location near you, because people are going to bring manufacturing closer home. I think that's there. Simultaneously, workplaces also will have to adjust to older workforces. I think that's very important. And they will also have to adjust to older customers. And when you look at that, you keep wondering, why are industries there as clusters? You go to pharma, it'll be either Gujarat or Hyderabad. You go to IT, it'll be Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, Pune, Noida. Clustering has its advantages. But as you have more and more digital stuff getting into real life, the need for clustering physically will also vanish. You'll end up with virtual clusters. I mean, that's the kind of demonstration I see. When you actually look 25 years from now, do people need to be physically clustered? Would rural-urban migration need to happen? These are the kind of things that industry will actually look at, and I'm going to bet my last rupee on it. Smart entrepreneurs are going to take advantage of these trends. Old companies with a lot of fixed assets, with their own investments in fixed locations, will be beaten to the finishing line by younger, smarter, nimbler people who will spread out their workforce, spread out their manufacturing locations, and take advantage of lower costs. I read that yesterday in the paper somewhere, in the flight, that companies are actually recruiting from tier 2, tier 3 cities, and those employees are quite happy to work from there. Employee costs are about a half. The employees actually have a lower living cost. So I think all these trends are going to affect how workplaces look like. What will happen to supply chains? Manufacturing will move closer to your home base. And countries, as a matter of policy, will try to reduce dependence on foreign suppliers or non-friendly suppliers for critical items. I mean, my next speaker is going to be from the United States. The government is investing more in semiconductor chip manufacture in the United States. India is doing the same, and we all know the reason why. And it's going to be more and more. We're going to have shorter supply chains, more efficient supply chains. And while global value chains are going to be a major part of the world economy, they already are, global value chains will actually slightly morph into value chains between partners and friends. And so who is the person who is a part of the value chain is going to become more important. And in that, what my previous speaker, the minister, said, FTAs are going to play a major role. FTAs are not going to be between countries which have ideological issues, which have fundamental challenges. They are going to be between countries who actually have both, A, complementary economies so that you can partner well, and two, countries whom you can trust. And I think trust is the underlying, and that's what has been missing in the multilateral system. And I think that's very important. And what will also happen in value chains is, in supply chains, is a lot of redundancy will be built in for emergencies. Countries can't live. I mean, take the container shortage, which I think, I came to Bangalore in August, everybody was crying about container problem. You know, Bangalore is a big place for what? Gherkin exports, about 2,000 crores. They all had a problem with containers. So I think what's the problem? There are only 4 shipping companies which control the entire container traffic in the world. I think the world will end up building redundancies in this kind of stuff. And the last thing here is that MSMEs, small manufacturers, small service providers, thanks to technology in 25 years, are going to become globally supplying their goods and services. I think technology will enable that. I still remember long ago, a small leather coat maker in Dharavi selling 2 to 3 pieces at a time through eBay across the world. Was it possible 20 years ago? You didn't know the guy. I think that's going to happen more and more as we become more literal, as there is more penetration of digital. Business models have to change as we go along. And what will happen is, there'll be much larger capital flows, both ways. Please understand that if you're going to be a $30 trillion economy, India is going to be a big outward investor, not just an inward investor. I'm currently negotiating an FTA with the UK, which will conclude by 31st of August to be signed by Diwali. India is the second biggest source of FDI in the United Kingdom. I didn't realize it till I actually read the data 6 months ago. We are the second biggest source. So, we have actually reversed the East India Company. We have 500,000 employees in the United Kingdom employed by Indian entrepreneurs who have factories there or services there. So I think this is going to be a phenomenon. It's not there'll be no FDI coming to India, but it's going to be two-way. There'll be a mobile population. It will not be just Indians chasing H-1B visas. There'll be a lot of people chasing Indian visas to come and work in India also. I think we should welcome that, because that's the partnership of equals. Work from home, virtual platforms, they're all going to affect the business models which companies have. And the issue of scale also becomes a question. Well, scale looks good today in manufacturing. 25 years from now, if you have distributed manufacturing, 3D manufacturing, do you need large scale at one location? Maybe you spread it out in 20 small locations. These are the kind of questions that technology is going to pose to business models. And it is absolutely important that green values, that is eco-friendly values, get integrated into whatever we are doing as we go along. Even in services, and in Bangalore is big, even when I negotiate FTAs, we call mode 1, 2, 3, 4 in services. Mode 1 is, delivery across borders. That's your BPO stuff. Mode 2 is your consumption abroad, that is tourism. Mode 3 is business establishment, that I open an office in your country and deliver it. And mode 4 is people going, that's your H-1B visas. We are actually de-emphasizing mode 4. Mode 4 will happen based on countries' needs for more manpower. Whether we get access to visas through a treaty with Australia, there are going to be 100,000 Indians going to Australia because they need them. We don't need a visa agreement with UK, nurses will keep going to UK. But mode 1, 2, 3 is the way in which businesses will evolve. Indian firms will have to learn over the next 20 years to deliver more and more services by opening offices abroad, by actually delivering things across the border. It'll be supplied from India, it'll be served from India, and also served in India. So, you'll have multiple modes of doing services. I think that's important. Coming to the last two parts, what are the unintended consequences of technology? It's nice to be gung-ho about technology, but let me tell you, everything has a flip side. And the flip side, when we go, and 25 years is a very long time. I mean, think of the poor rickshaw-wallahs. I'm sure Bangalore would have rickshaws about 50 or 60 years ago. They don't exist. I think a municipality bans them, and even if you allow them, they will not exist, because they can't compete with that auto rickshaw-wallah. But something else will actually, eliminate the auto rickshaw-wallah 20 years from now. That's going to be the importance of technology. What will happen is, as more and more new products come up, new ways of doing things come up, it will cannibalize existing product, it will cannibalize existing services. So somebody's success is somebody else's loss. The total gain will be more than the total loss, but that's how economies grow. And I think we have to realize that cannibalization will happen of a lot of existing products, industries. Secondly, skills will become redundant. What was useful yesterday will be useless tomorrow. Factories and buildings which have been built, a lot of them can go waste. I mean, you can go to large part. You know, where the gold rush in the United States, new cities and towns came, and when that ended, 150 years ago, you have empty towns there, ghost towns. So I think that's going to be there. And the demand for a lot of things which are greatly in demand today may vanish. Demand for steel may come down. Demand for cement may come down. There may be new ways of doing this. So that's where I land. And 3 points. What can things go wrong dramatically is what I was asked. One was climate change, which I mentioned. It can lead to unknown consequences. Pandemics. COVID taught us that 2 years ago. I'm hearing about monkeypox. People who read the newspapers read that. The other is the world breaking up into silos. You're seeing what's happening, in some parts of the world right now, and leading consequently to trade wars and sanctions. So these are the unknowns which can disrupt. But the bottom line, whatever happens, I'm very positive on the country. I completely echo what the minister said. India was 25% of the world GDP for almost 2,000 years. That's our rightful place. We are on track. If we maintain it, we'll reach there. Thank you. Any questions? I think I've got 3 or 4 minutes.
In spirit of keeping to time and continuing the conversation, we'll limit ourselves to 1 question.
Perfect.
And then we can continue the conversation outside.
Yeah, very good morning, sir. It was a good presentation. Just I wanted to know, as you are predicted a lot of futuristics in down the line 20 to 25 years, what will happen to this tier 2 and 3 cities? Will it exist or everything will become tier 1, whatever, with rapid growth and urbanization? Urbanization. Thank you.
Now, I am not Francis Fukuyama or Toffler who can predict 25 years from now. But my feeling is, and what the government is doing is pushing what is available in metros in terms of quality of life, health services, medical services, social services, down and into the interior parts of the country, smaller towns, rural areas. And technology will enable jobs and incomes there. I think tier 2, tier 3 will match tier 1 in terms of quality of life. And the compulsion to move to cities as migration will not happen. And I'll just end with one example. It's a classic one, and very few people study it. I've told the Swiss ambassador. Switzerland is a great country. They have a deliberate policy in terms of dispersing their economy. It has no big city. I mean, the so-called city of Zurich is just about 4 lakhs. Neighboring country, Austria, which has the same population, capital Vienna is 2.5 million. So actually, I think it's perfectly possible, and some parts of India, your own state, a lot of the smaller district headquarters are as livable as Bangalore with all the facilities. So I don't think tier 2 will vanish. They will elevate themselves to the level of tier 1 and be equally livable. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I request Shri Ashok Mittalji to felicitate Mr. Subramaniam?
Our next speaker of the day is the young and energetic Executive Director of the Indian Express Group, Shri Anant Goenka. Mr. Goenka, the floor is all yours.
I almost tripped on the robot. Thank you. Sorry. very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. When Ram Madhavji sent me a message inviting me to speak here, I have a very close friend. His name is also Anant Goenka. He is the MD of CET, grandson of Ram Prasad, of RPG, Ram Prasad Goenka, and we often get confused for each other. He's also from Bombay. He's a few years older than me. So when Ram Madhavji sent me the invitation, I, without looking at it, forwarded it to Anant Goenka, saying, I think it's come to me by mistake, it's actually for you. And he looked at it, and Anant forwarded back to me saying, no, it's actually for you. And why did I think that? I think I thought it was because normally in conferences like this, the numbers that you hear, the numbers that I heard for the last two presentations, I think the smallest number I heard was $75 billion. We're all talking in billions, trillions, a $15 trillion Indian economy. But the news industry and news is frighteningly small as an industry. And so that's why I always wonder, so you must ask Ram Madhavji why he's invited me here. I'm not sure. But I have an idea, and I have a theory. And I think one of the reasons that, that news is given the importance in India and in the world that it is given, and the reason that, a third generation promoter of a news organization is speaking here today, is because, much like airlines, no matter how difficult the business model of an airline is, cities are building and coming around air travel. So I think airlines are playing and just like airlines are playing an irreversible role in our lives, I think news plays similarly an important and an irreplaceable role in our lives and in our democracy. It's not just news. It's the organized news industry that's playing an irreplaceable role. And why am I distinguishing between news and the organized news industry? Because Web 1.0, we have been hearing ad nauseum that anyone with a smartphone is a journalist. And that's true. Of course, that's true. But now, 10 years after internet ubiquity all over the world, maybe 5-6 years of ubiquity in India, I think what we've come to realize is that generally, anybody with a smartphone isn't a very good journalist, generally. Of course, there are many exceptions, but they only go to prove the fact that doing the news consistently and with accountability is very, very hard. The news business is very, very hard. I think somewhere consumers are beginning to understand that the organized institutional providers of news have of course, an irreversible place and an irreplaceable place in society, but there is a demand for this. There's a demand for, somebody who's sticking their neck out and saying, here is what you should be reading. I'm saying this with some confidence today, especially after COVID. If you look at our industry, the growth of organized news industry that we have seen on digital platforms over the last 2 years after the pandemic, I think it's proof that people don't just want the news, they want credible news. They want news from domain experts, and they want news that they can really, really value, trust, and question. So it's not just the smartphone-wielding journalists, but even big tech. I have friends at Apple. I think Apple is one of the most incredible organizations that is functioning today in the world. But the fact that Apple has been trying to get news right and has been doing it with very limited success for, I think, 6 years now, I think it just again goes to show that news is hard. So whether it's Apple or UC News, in spite of all of big tech's efforts to foray into news, I think it's clear now around the world that no one has been able to replace the role that the New York Times or the Washington Post plays in American democracy. No one has been able to replace the role that the South China Morning Post plays in Hong Kong, or that the Times plays in the UK. So all this goes to show that I think that news is hard. And why is it hard? Well, I think it's hard because just by its very nature, it's extremely difficult to tell somebody why you need to understand the erosion of the MFN that we heard right now. Why is the erosion of the MFN a subject that you need to spend time reading and consuming? So at one point in time, a newspaper would land up at your doorstep, and the newspaper was only fighting for attention. The only thing the newspaper had to compete with was the family and the family conversation. I think now news is competing with so much, right? You have a constant bombardment of very attractive photographs and videos that are coming on your platform, on your social media platforms, and news has to compete with all of that. There's just so much that you have to convince a reader to not consume and instead consume something which can be quite difficult and tricky to package and to put together. So I think that's the very nature of news in itself, I think particularly shows that it's hard. Doing the news it's hard, and just doing that is hard. I think it's also hard because in these extremely polarized times that we're living in, people are constantly asking news companies to pick a side. They're asking, are you with us or against us? This is the game that big tech doesn't want to play. The evolution of news, if I can just take a second and ask, I had given a slide, if I can ask Diksha to just put that up. A lot of the news industry is facing these tremendous pressures, and they're kind of I think news industry, not only in India, but around the world, they're falling to this trap of taking a side, of picking an idea, picking a viewpoint. Reporters and journalists today, they're so evolved, the algorithms, they are getting paid. Reporters today get paid not by how many articles they write, but by how many people have become subscribers based on the articles that they have written. So excuse the messiness of this, but this is something that has some resonance around, I've shared around in my industry, and people tend to refer to it a few times, that this is sort of the evolution. I'm just showing you the evolution of news. I call this a Neanderthal to New York Times. You start with an aggregate and report the news, and you do it consistently. You write and produce it well. Then you start distributing it well. And once you do this consistently and you distribute the news well, you become a destination product. That's your first step to establishing a direct relationship with the consumer. And once you have a direct relationship with the consumer, monetization opportunities kind of explode. You start charging the consumer to read the content. You do all sorts of things. You can do brand solutions better. You can do affiliate businesses. The monetization explodes. But this is just very, very tempting to get news organizations to start picking a side. So I think, when we think of rebooting India for Web 2.0 in a more connected world, I think we must remind ourselves that in this environment where it's extremely tempting for news media to pick a side, we must remind ourselves the value of the old classic objective journalism. The classic objective journalism, which is not taking a side, but it's doing its work based on issues. And the fact that objective journalism is in everyone's interests. Especially in India, I feel where the space for the opposition, and when I say opposition, I don't mean only central, I just mean an opposition voice, a opposition voice, whether it's center or the state, or whether it's even in corporate India. The challenger, the opposition voices has shriveled and shrunk. In this environment, I believe that a free press is vital. And it's vital for what? It's vital for creating a culture of checks and balances. A free press, when we think of a free press, we have to think of what a free press is and what a free press isn't. A free press isn't the opposition. A free press isn't the opposition voice. A free press isn't for or against any political party. A free press doesn't keep telling you that the world is better today than it was yesterday. A free press investigates. A free press shows articles and invests time and effort invest time and effort in creating and producing content which is uncomfortable to digest for not just for powers, but for every reader. It's about bringing issues that are getting buried. And I think that we have to recognize that this benefits not just citizens and activists, but it benefits the economy. It benefits all of society. You know, in the Indian Express, it's almost been 11 years since I joined the Express Group. And when I joined the Express Group, it's a family business, and my father asked me to join. I mean, I had joined the Express emotionally since I was born, but when I formally joined, the task given to me was to make the Indian Express catch up with Web 1.0. This was 11 years ago. And the shortcut that I was told to catch up to Web 1.0 was to do the ABCD: astrology, Bollywood, cricket, and devotion. The ABCD got you to get successful on web. I'm really happy that none of us took that shortcut. Ladies and gentlemen, today, on the backs of our unique style of investigative and explanatory journalism, the Indian Express Group is reaching 200 million users a month in 6 languages around the world. We're one of the largest digital news groups in the world in terms of sheer size. And I don't think we could have done any of that if it wasn't for staying true to our values of objective, independent, and honest journalism. So I think I'll end over there. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time. Thank you. I think we have a few questions, or?
Yeah, we'll stick to 2 questions.
Sure.
Anybody from the audience?
You'll have to ask your questions with a couple of zeros removed.
I'm Chudi Shivram. I'm an independent journalist. You touched upon the point in your talk very briefly about media being divided with bias left and right. How do you see the trend in the next few decades? The trend of news has become op-ed, more on television than objective news. How do you see the trend in the next coming decades?
I'm hopeful that consumers will eventually start rejecting, readers, audiences will start rejecting this trend. And I see that kind of happening. And I'm saying, at one point it was a hope and a prayer. But I think now, especially again, like I said, post-COVID and post the infodemic, there is a demand for just domain expertise. Just tell me the news with, in a way that I understand it, and in a way, and from somebody who is an expert. So I do think that there is going to be, I think the explosion of op-ed, I think there will be a correction. But of course, I mean, this is a trend that's going to stay on for a very long time. And it's only conversations like this and educating consumers and audiences and readers that will, I think, help in making them aware that the way we're structured today as society and the way the news industry is responding to the business challenges is just creating echo chambers and louder echo chambers. And I think we just have to keep educating and reminding ourselves that that's not in our interest.
Hi, Mr. Goenka. I'm Priya Sehgal from NewsX. Just wanted to ask you, you said that we must be objective. We must give every side a chance. So there's that old style of he said, she said. You get 2 quotes from one person, you get 2 quotes from the other person, you balance it out, and the reader makes her own mind. But what happens is, if the other side is wrong, does the wrong also get an equal voice? Should it get the same amount of platform? And who decides what is right or wrong?
That's editorial judgment. That's the old classic editorial judgment. I mean, you don't walk onto the street and put a camera in front of, a mad person. I mean, who has no credibility for what they're saying. I think it's just that. And, I think we complicate this too much. If there is an opinion that has news value, if it's adding value to the consumer, if it's adding value to the audience, if it's important to hear what XYZ person is saying, you have to give that person a voice. If it's a radical maverick perspective, you don't give it a voice. That is really why, and this question, it's simple, but it's also the answer is not as simple as it says, because this is really why I think tech doesn't get news. Tech can't figure out news. This is why news has to come from human, from a very, very human approach. Do we have
Thank
time
you,
for
sir.
one more? No?
May I request Ms. Priya Sehgal to please felicitate Mr. Goenka. A huge round of applause for him, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goenka, for the excellent presentation. It is time to listen to another distinguished speaker, Ambassador Atul Kashyap, a diplomat, formerly with the U.S. State Department, and currently the President of United States, India Business Council in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Kashyap, please come and address the audience.
I just landed from San Francisco a few hours ago, so forgive me if I'm a bit jet lagged, but it's great to see all of you. Ramji, namaste, nice to see you. Audience, great to see you as well. Friends, I bring warm greetings from the United States Chamber of Commerce and from the United States India Business Council. We have hundreds of members who are dedicated to the happiness, prosperity, and well-being of the people of the United States and India, all 1.7 billion of them. And I believe, personally, that if the United States and India can increase our trade relations and increase our happiness, it'll be good for us, and it will be good for the entire world. It is also a particular pleasure for me to speak to you here in Bengaluru, where my American grandfather was born in 1907 and lived at a little bungalow at 2 Palace Road in the early years of his life. So I have a very strong emotional connection to Bengaluru, and I couldn't be happier than to talk to you today. On the ride in from the airport, and I should say for context, I've been coming to Bangalore for decades, and I remember it clearly from the 1970s. I was riding in from the airport. The airport, by the way, is magnificent, but the road was also magnificent. And I did a tweet last night talking about how much India is changing and how much India is on the move. And I talk with personal experience to American audiences about how much we don't appreciate the dynamism of India. I've been all over the world, and I always tell people America is an incredibly dynamic society. It is constantly reinventing itself. It is constantly examining itself to figure out how to form a more perfect union. Friends, I can tell you that is also true about India. Nothing about the India of today bears resemblance to the India that I remember as a child in the 1970s. If you look at all of the waves of absolute transformation that are taking place in information, in communications, in highways and airports, railways, something even as humble and yet crucially important as toilets or drinking water. If you look at fintech, if you look at the digital economy, you look at GST creating a national market, the Aadhaar card, food subsidies that have helped people through the pandemic, vaccines that have kept people healthy, and so much else besides. There is a sweeping revolution happening in India, and it is going to have an enormous positive impact on India, on America, and on the entire world. After centuries of disruption, India is returning, as Minister Hardeep said earlier, to its historic stature as one of the largest and most dynamic and prosperous economies on earth. Friends, I'm here to tell you, the politics of prosperity seem resurgent at this moment in time. I saw this firsthand during my tenure as the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires in New Delhi last year, and I'm seeing it even more now as the President of the United States India Business Council. The recent dynamism of India is truly amazing to behold. And this conference is further evidence of that. Friends, I achieved what I wanted to in my diplomatic career. I feel very good about the transformation of U.S.-India relations. When I joined the career, and when I first started working on India, that was a relationship that I would argue to you was defined by obstacles. And now, my dear friends, that is a relationship between the United States and India that is defined by opportunity. We achieved so much between the US and India working as partners in the past 20 years. I think back on the nuclear deal, on the Counterterrorism Joint Working Group, the trilat with Japan and India and the United States, the Quad, the Homeland Security Dialogue, our East Asia Dialogue, our development cooperation, our vaccine partnership, our space cooperation. The list goes on and on and on and on. Now that we have built that kind of robust partnership between the United States and India, and we have built the steel frame, the resilient steel frame of our relationship, the key now is to look at how we can achieve our full potential as the world's two greatest democracies. And this is where I think it is important to turn to the economic, commercial, and investment frame. My publicly stated vision, and it echoes President Biden's that he said earlier, is of $500 billion in trade in goods and services between the United States and India annually. Right now we're at about 150, so there is room for improvement and room for growth. What's amazing about the trade, however, is that it has grown mightily in the past few years, and it has every prospect of growing mightily in the future. Digital economic trade alone between the United States and India is over $100 billion, and it's climbing very, very fast. Friends, that digital trade, the digital economy trade, is the goose that lays the golden eggs between both of our countries. US and Indian digital economy companies dominate the top 10 list in that most dynamic field of economic endeavor. And my appeal to you would be that we make sure that we create the structures and the regulations and the legal framework to ensure the continued vitality and continued growth of the digital economy in the United States and India. I was in Palo Alto, what feels like yesterday for me, but was probably 3 days ago, at a fantastic event, another think tank event. And what's amazing about Palo Alto when you walk around is how many Indians you see. You see them everywhere, Indians and Indian Americans. And all through that entire geography south of San Francisco, from San Francisco down to San Jose, you can get Indian music on the radio, you can get Indian food everywhere. You will find the children of India, who are now many of them Americans, building that digital economy of the future and having already built the digital economy that has resulted in the sweeping transformation of our lives. So let's keep that goose laying the golden eggs. It's very, very important. In fact, you might argue that there's ample sense in having a digital services agreement between the United States, India, and other advanced high-trust economies that share our values. Friends, I don't need to tell you that India has unbelievable ability and potential. There was a certain era where my dad emigrated from India because that potential went untapped. But I firmly believe, I passionately believe, that India can fulfill its vision of a 10 or 15, or as Mr. Subramaniam said, maybe even $30 trillion economy by simply dismantling hurdles, by empowering the vast human talent of this great country, of empowering individuals, businesses, and society, removing roadblocks, and promulgating clear, predictable, best-in-world policies, laws, and regulations. On this, I'll make a personal comment. I was just in Singapore on the way here, and I met with American and Indian companies who are members of the US-India Business Council, and they told me how Singapore is so enabling, how their policy environment, their regulatory environment is always designed toward being as competitive as possible. And as a result, the world has beat a path to the door of Singapore. There are hundreds of American companies there. There's more investment by the United States in Singapore than in the rest of ASEAN combined. So there's a lesson in that regulatory environment, the old saying being, if you build it, they will come. And I hope that in India, you will build that framework so that you can capture the full advantage of India's rise at this current moment. My feeling, friends, is that red tape should yield to red carpet. Policies like Make in India and the production-linked incentives indicate a profound shift in official thinking, a positive shift. And although our member companies still view India as very complex, extremely complex, and challenging as an investment destination at some times, they realize the sheer potential of India, and they appreciate sincerely the values of India. They appreciate the human talent of India, and they, I think, look to India as a trusted partner and friend in so many different ways. I would like to lay out, therefore, a challenge. It's been very admirable to see India's rise through the list of countries in the Ease of Doing Business Index, and that requires hard work, lots of hard work. But my challenge would be, can we see India rise to be in the top 10 of countries in the Ease of Doing Business Index? If India were in that top 10, the trillions and trillions of dollars that are looking for safe investment destinations would flock to India and would help advance that vision of a $10 or $20 trillion economy that much faster. It's been loud and clear in all of my meetings on Wall Street, in Silicon Valley, in Washington, in Singapore, in Delhi, and in Bangalore, and hopefully in a couple days in Mumbai, that corporates are very optimistic about India's growth trajectory, that they have investable dollars available, and what they're looking for is a sound policy environment. So that is the potential that can be tapped. That is the potential that really will help fuel India's transformation. We're entering a new era of innovation. In fact, we're already in it, during which India is projected to be among the youngest, largest, and fastest growing economies, boasting scalable research capacity. What does that mean? It's jargon, scalable research capacity. Put simply, it means you have the human talent to do the things that many other countries don't have and can't do. You have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of the most educated people that have the skills that the tech economy needs, desperately needs. India also has really strong corporate management, and it has, not only beyond the tech talent pool, hundreds of millions of people and very attractive demographics. You have 100 million college graduates, you have 1.5 million postgraduate degree holders. There is everything here for Make in India to succeed. With these advantages, there is no reason India could not become a global R&D capital and ride this wave of innovation to developed country status well before the end of this century. Already, some of the most advanced research being done in the corporate world is being done in part in India. I would argue that it is actually being done more in India and the United States and more between India and the United States than in any other geography. As I look at the companies and I talk to them and I hear from their CEOs what they do and how they do it, these companies are increasingly blended. They're not purely Indian and they're not purely American. They are, the corporate DNA is blending to such an extent that they're becoming a fusion entity of US and Indian all around the world. And they are doing good things for people and for citizens all around the world. Now, on this, it's important to keep in mind that there are very serious challenges that face us. Number one, inflation and price rise globally is going to be a real challenge for everybody in this room and everybody on the planet. The other challenge is the uncertainty brought by war, and by a war that is causing serious hardship and food price rise and energy price rise that is going to impact the poorest people on earth more than anyone else. The other challenge that we're facing is a potential ongoing supply chain crunch. If you look at the China COVID-0 policies, it is having a real impact on the flow of manufactured goods, and that's going to be felt by everybody. There's also a bit of turbulence in the innovation sector. Global capital is getting very concerned about these trend lines, and what we're seeing is a lot of capital investment caution. And so I would argue to you that India has probably a sweet spot right now, but that sweet spot might end. And we don't know when that is, when there won't be as much money available to fuel the kinds of investments that can help India leap ahead. And this is something that is known not only by Indian policymakers, but it's also known by the officials of all of the key investment destinations. And right now, I would say the most prominent are, frankly, the United States, where the government is making very strong moves to try to attract inbound investment and also return investment. Also India, of course, with all of the policies that Minister Puri talked about, but also Mexico, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, so many other countries around the world. So where is our comparative advantage? Simply put, we're democracies. We have a quad partnership that is built to last and is going to have a very positive impact, not only on the United States and India, but on the people of the entire Indo-Pacific and the entire world. We are resilient. We are resilient, free, and high-trust societies. And we can leverage that strength in any number of ways to power the entire world out of the pandemic, out of the current moment of uncertainty and risk, and create a better future for all of the people of humanity. In particular, I think that we ought to focus on a few challenges. Number one, we can have a dispositive impact in building a dependable, resilient, free world supply chain for all of the things that we must have, the critical materials of fueling and powering and supporting innovation societies, things like semiconductors and rare earths and much else besides, that we are going to need to power a clean energy revolution for a better future for humanity. I also think we ought to create frameworks for the development of emerging technologies. There ought to be tech convergence between America and India and other high-trust partners on things that are really important for the future: artificial intelligence, 5G, 6G, quantum computing, outer space, and so much else besides. These things are critical, and our innovation as Quad partners will power the entire world's development and approach to tech design and governance. And that leads me to my last thought, which I will issue again, is a call for all of us to use our sheer strength and resilience as free and innovative societies to empower all of our people and the world to power us to a greater era of freedom, prosperity, health, and happiness. The United States India Business Council, part of the United States Chamber of Commerce, believes passionately in the Founding Fathers' vision of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you all very much.
We limit ourselves to one question in this session. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for this excellent presentation, a very positive outlook on the future of India-US partnership. I'm Ashok Sajanhar, former ambassador of India to a few countries. I was in Washington, D.C., in fact, when after our nuclear test, we had the next steps to strategic partnership. That was the time when we signed the first defense agreement. And we had also the July 18, 2005, the framework agreement on India-US nuclear deal. I agree with you, and I think to echo what Prime Minister Modi said at the joint session of the US Congress in 2016, that this is an indispensable partnership. And also, he mentioned that we have overcome the hesitations of history. So my question to you under these circumstances is, and I agree what you say, this is the common vision of both countries, that we have a $500 billion bilateral trade by 2025. So my question, two questions related. One is in terms of the restoration of GSP to India. That, as you know, was taken away from India in 2019, April 2019. And what we said, the amount is not very large, just about $6-7 billion. But in terms of it helps and supports the sort of people, the industry, MSMEs in India. And if these exports don't go from India, they come from China to the United States. The second question is related is what you mentioned, that it is the service sector which is really going to take our bilateral trade partnership forward. My question is, India is looking, focusing on our manufacturing, because that is what will provide jobs, employment to our people, and that is what we need. Today we have about 15, 16, 17% of our GDP contributed by manufacturing. We want that to increase to 25, 30%. As the Commerce Secretary also just mentioned, we need to have 10 trillion in manufacturing after 20 years. So where is it that India and the United States can partner as far as the manufacturing is concerned? In terms of technology, I know we are going in for green energy and other similar green hydrogen and carbon capture, etc. But where specifically do you think both the countries can come together as far as improving India's manufacturing prowess is concerned? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for that question. It's nice to see you. Let me offer what I think is the perspective of our member companies, who represent trillions of dollars of revenue, tens of millions of employees, and hundreds of billions of dollars of available investable capital. What they're looking for is an enabling environment. They don't really need help. They're some of the most sophisticated companies on earth. They have the highest degree of ethical, managerial, environmental standards and practices. They have the highest technologies in the world. They have the best human resources and talent. What they need is an enabling environment. If they have a situation where they can make a very stable, predictable, multi-decade investment to the tune of tens of billions of dollars, they'll do it. The most critical thing is to understand the psychology of investors. And an investor wants stability, predictability, transparency, ease of doing business, simple procedures, and a level playing field. They don't want unfair advantage. They want a level playing field. So what's happened is that a lot of American companies in particular have done quite well and have invested very heavily in India and are doing exactly the kinds of things you talked about in your GSP question, which is they're finding Indian suppliers all around the country, including in the rural areas, and creating and bringing them into high trust, high sophistication supply chains that lead right to America and Europe and other parts of these companies' operations. And it's sparking prosperity in the rural economy of India in ways that have never been seen in terms of how much reach American companies have. Now, the amazing thing and the genius of US-India relations is that is equally true of Indian companies in America, who are investing in places you've probably never heard of in rural America, and they're empowering people. They are building the resilience and happiness and well-being of communities, and they're doing great work, they're making money, and they tell me, they say the American environment is totally empowering. It's stable, it's predictable, and it is enabling for business. So my suggestion would be, if India continues to do that and build that environment, it is going to see an amazing degree of interest from companies all around the world, and it will help power that vision of an India as a truly developed and prosperous society.
Thank you so much, sir. So we'll continue the conversation outside. We're running out of time. May I request Mr. Rajesh ji from WMG to felicitate our speaker? Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Kashyap, for your address. Our last speaker is another renowned expert, the chairman of Team Lease, Mr. Manish Sabarwal. Hey Manish, please take over.
Thank you. I've been asked to get us back on track, so I'm going to cut my remarks a little short. So, India conducted two reckless experiments in 1947. One political, they were forms of technology, one political and one economic. No country had given universal franchise at birth. India and Pakistan, born on the same night, have had very different destinies because 3 million people in India win an election. We've created the world's largest democracy on the infertile soil of the world's most hierarchical society. So that experiment worked out very well. But we made a nutty economic experiment. It was called the 1955 Avadi Resolution or the 1956 Second Five-Year Plan, which essentially means today our labor is handicapped without capital and our capital is handicapped without labor. We are 5th in the world in total GDP, but we are 138th in the world in per capita GDP. Now, what did this teach us? Why did we fail at Industry and Commerce 1.0? It is because there is no such thing as poor people. There are people in poor places, right? An electrician who migrates from Patna to Bangalore gets 5 times more salary. The same electrician migrates to the US, he gets 25 times more salary. So the pathology is not at the level of the individual, it's really at the level of productivity, right? So the most interesting question for Industry and Commerce 2.0 is, why do some countries, why do some places, why do some sectors, why do some professions give you higher wages? At least that's from my perspective. And I would argue that, this is the question which I asked myself when I landed in the US in August '94 for my MBA. These Americans aren't smarter than us. Why are they richer than us? Clearly, I can kick their butt individually, right? Why does Ram Bharose, who works all day, make 50,000 rupees? And why does Joe Sixpack, who watches college football and drink beer, makes $50,000? And it's really about the productivity of 5 things. It's the productivity of states, it's the productivity of cities, it is the productivity of firms, and it is the productivity of individuals. If you think about states, we're in Karnataka, my parents live in UP, both states have the same GDP, but Karnataka does it with 1/4 the number of people. If you think about cities, if everybody in India lived in Bangalore, then our GDP would be more than China. Bangalore's GDP is $11,000. If you think about firms, when we rank manufacturing companies at the highest, at the largest and smallest, there's a 24 times difference in productivity. If you don't have that productivity, you don't pay the wage premium. If you don't pay the wage premium, you'll never be productive. And obviously, individuals, when you think about which sector they work in, agriculture is 42% of our labor force, but only 14% of our GDP. IT is only 0.8% of our labor force, and it produces 8% of GDP. And obviously, the huge difference in the skills that we have between the number of people. I mean, a graduate would get 4 times different in salary based on many variables with us. So I would submit that India doesn't have a shortage of land, labor, or capital. You could give every Indian household half an acre and they would fit into Rajasthan and Haryana. We don't have a shortage of labor. 40% of our labor force is Vela. And we do not have a shortage of capital. 50% of India's foreign direct investment since 1947 has come in the last 5 years. 90% of India's venture capital since 1947 has come in the last 10 years. So what is the disease? It's what economists call total factor productivity or solo residual, but most of us just call it innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology. And I think it's important to think about productivity in those terms because sort of formalization, financialization, urbanization, industrialization, and human capital are really a form of technology. If we want India to be prosperous, we can't have 63 million enterprises, 12 million of them don't have an office, 12 million work from home, only 12 million registered for GST, only 1 million paying Social Security, but only 23,500 companies in India with a paid-up capital of more than 10 crores. We can't define urbanization as shoving more people into Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore. We only have 52 cities with more than 1 million people. China has 375. We can't have a credit to GDP ratio of 50%, which is where it's been stuck for the last 5 years. But if you look at Industry and Commerce 2.0, there's a new economic order. There's a shift of economic gravity to Asia. You don't have to be Western to be modern anymore. There's a new world of work. You know, the average life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company is now 14. When the first list came out in 1955, it was 64. There's a new world of working from home, though I'm a little skeptical than others, you know, about work from home. We had started with 5% working from home pre-pandemic. We'll probably end up with 20%. I don't think we'll end up with everybody working from home. A CEO I met recently said, you know, Andrew Carnegie in the 1800s was once asked how many people work at US Steel, and he said about half. That's probably true for the work from home right now, and so we have to be careful about thinking about productivity. I think there's a new world of education. You know, in a world where Google knows everything, knowing is useless, learning how to learn is the key capability. And you've got to think about soft skills being more valuable than hard skills. But soft skills are not taught, they are caught. And that's why the new world of education is much more complex than it was in the past. So if I could think about what could go wrong, I would really say it would be short-term thinking, small thinking, and really selfish thinking in some sense. You know, if you think of Jonas Salks, he was the inventor of the polio vaccine. He said the most important question to ask yourself is, are you being a good ancestor? And you know, as somebody who runs a public company now, balancing the next quarter and quarter century is really, really hard, right? You can maximize the next quarter, you can screw up the next quarter century, you can tell everybody about the next quarter century, but you do have to deliver the last quarter. And I think if you think about it in terms of just the difference between, you know, I was in Kashmir last week, and one of the people there told me, Kashmir ki badkismati hai ki amanat aur jagir mein siyasat ne, they didn't understand the difference between amanat and a jagir. You know, amanat is, a jagir is yours. You can do what the hell you want, right? The Maharaja of Cooch Behar used to spend 50% of the treasury on Rolls Royce and Cartier. But an amanat is not yours. You're supposed to hand it over in better condition than you got it, right? And I think that's really important in thinking about the challenges of India. I mean, if you're going to be short-term, you know, I just asked a very senior person in Rajasthan, how are you going to pay for your defined benefit pensions? He said, I don't have to pay for it. The chief minister 25 years from now has to pay for it. And I would say that's the view of world as a Jagir, where we have to think about not stealing from our grandchildren and being good ancestors. That's probably the only way. But the only way to be good ancestors is to think about luck, skill, and choices, right? You know, I know lots of lucky people who are skilled. I know lots of people skilled who are unlucky. So I think, you know, when Dumbledore tells Harry Potter in Chamber of Secrets, it is our choices more than our abilities that reveal what we really are. I think we're on track with good choices, and we're starting to see results, right? We've 400 billion of goods exports for the first time. If you think about 50% of foreign direct investment since 1947 in the last 5 years. If you think about services, last year India exported more software than Saudi Arabia did oil. And that's really important to think about the economic complexity that goes into that argument. And obviously, $80 billion of remittances is a form of human capital. You know, India has the highest remittances in the world. So obviously, there's a lot of distance to cover. I think, you know, when I landed in the US in 1994, there was a front page article in the Wall Street Journal which said that India is more interesting than important. I hope that journalist is eating the newspaper on which she wrote that, because obviously what's happening in India isn't once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. But we have to be careful. You know, we missed our tryst with destiny. I memorized Pandit Nehru's speech when I was a child. There are 300 million people in India who will never read the newspaper that they deliver, or sit in the car that they clean, or send their kids to the school that they help build. But this is not a problem like cancer or climate change. This is a plumbing problem in some sense, right? And so if you think about industry, what is strength in a 21st century economy? You know, one of my favorite poets is Ramdhari Singh Dinkar. He says, Shama shobhati us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho. Right? Only snakes with venom can be kind, benevolent, and generous. Only the powerful can be generous. And what is power in a 21st economy? It is really human capital as captured by technology, as captured by productivity, as captured by entrepreneurship. And now that I think policy embraces all three of them, I think things look good for India at 100. Thank you.
We'll take one question to stick to time.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful talk. You had spoken about land, labor, and capital. When it comes to capital, there are a lot of degree programs and skilling programs for people to get acquainted to the world of capital. Even in terms of labor, be it HR or other fields, there are a lot of ways in which people can tap into that. When it comes to land, be it land use policy, litigations, a whole lot of litigations at the courts are from land-related issues. So what is stopping our policymakers in the education space from having good programs, institutions, and knowledge building for the land domain, which is crucial to unlocking the potential of India? Thank you.
I mean, if education could solve problems, then I wouldn't diagnose the problem as education. See, with every problem in India, I think most people tend to focus on the what. One of the biggest questions I have in government is how do you get something done in government after everybody who matters in government agrees with you? You have to think about that a little bit. There are very few people who disagree on land being a choke point, but how to get land is a political economy question. It's not about conflicts, it's about trade-offs. It's not about the list of ingredients, it's about the recipe, it's about sequencing, it's about proportion, right? With every great reform in India, there's a report 20 years old that can tell you what is to be done, but the challenge arises in how. I think that land is really nothing Delhi can do about it. The 28 chief ministers, soon to be 29, really have to recognize that creating a fertile habitat for job creation. So I think if your question was purely about education, I think NEP, which is the new education policy, clearly allows interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary higher education, and there will be universities who will educate, who will innovate and educate in these domains. But my sense is that the question has really shifted. India can't be ruled from Delhi. Indira Gandhi in 15 of her speeches said, strong states lead to a weak nation. Maybe that was appropriate at some point. It's no longer appropriate. And so I think that 28 chief ministers will have to, at some point, take on the political vested interests that are holding back land reform. Because of the land labor capital, the one with the most regulatory cholesterol today is land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. May I request Mr. Shaurya Doval to felicitate Mr. Sabharwal? Is Shaurya sir in the room? Okay, so Arun sir is going to fill in for it. Thank you. Thank you so much. We hope that you had a good first half of today. Now we're going to move into the most exciting part of the conference, which we're all very excited about. As Ram Madhavji likes to say, it's the pinnacle of our conference, and in about a couple of minutes, we'll take you into the metaverse itself. We've been talking about what it looks like, what we are going to look like in it, but now we're going to experience it. So I encourage you to hold your seats tight, and we'll move into the session quickly. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. The next 40 minutes, you will witness the future of technology. And for that, I would like to welcome Mr. Ajit Mohan, Vice President and Managing Director of Meta India, to take us through it.
My name is Ajit Mohan, and I lead the company that was formerly known as Facebook, now Meta. I grew up in a small town near Cochin, not too far from here. Spent a bunch of years in Southeast Asia and North America. before coming back home about 14 years ago. But today is not about my story. Today is an articulation of what we as a company see in the evolution of the metaverse, the central topic of this conclave, and quite importantly, India's role in shaping it. And I want to thank Ram Madhavji and Shaurya and the leadership of the India Foundation for inviting me and inviting my team to make this presentation here. Before I start explaining what the metaverse is, I thought it would be helpful to play a video where the founder and CEO of the company, Mark Zuckerberg, outlines the vision he described for what the metaverse could be 10 years from now.
Today, we're going to talk about the metaverse. I want to share what we imagine is possible.
Yeah.
The experiences you'll have, the creative economy we'll all build, and the technology that needs to be invented, as well as how we're going to all do this together. The next platform and medium will be even more immersive.
Like a shop.
Some call it skill.
Keep talking.
An embodied internet where you're in the experience, not just looking at it. And we call this the metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse. Everything we do online today, connecting socially, entertainment, games, work, is going to be more natural and vivid. Whoa, all right, that's a little too realistic. Now this is more my style. We believe the metaverse will be the successor to the mobile internet. And you're going to be able to do almost anything you can imagine. All right, perfect.
Boy.
Oh, hey, Mark. Hey, what's going on?
Hi, Mark. What's up, Mark?
This place is amazing. The feeling of presence. This is the defining quality of the metaverse. You're going to really feel like you're there with other people. You'll see their facial expressions, you'll see their body language, maybe figure out if they're actually holding a winning hand. All the subtle ways that we communicate that today's technology can't quite deliver.
I knew you were bluffing.
Avatars will be as common as profile pictures today, but instead of a static image, they're going to be living 3D representations of you. Beyond avatars, there is your home space. Your home is your personal space from which you can teleport to anywhere you want.
Koi fish that fly? That's new.
This is wild.
The metaverse isn't something we're building so much as it's something we're building for.
Across the industry, we need to bring that same imagination and commitment to building for interoperability, openness, safety, and privacy, as we do for all the other product aspects of the metaverse. These have to be fundamental building blocks, just like the other software and experiences that we've been talking about. Our hope, though, is that if we all work at it, then within the next decade, the metaverse will reach 1 billion people, host hundreds of billions of dollars of digital commerce, and support jobs for millions of creators and developers. We are fully committed to this. It is the next chapter of our work, and we believe for the internet overall. Beyond the constraints of screens, beyond the limits of distance and physics, beyond any one company, and that will be made by all of us. And I'm just incredibly energized to be on this journey with all of you. That was fun.
Good job, Mark.
That's the vision of what this world will be 10 years from now. But let's step back to where we are and really get to the heart of what really is the metaverse. And the best way to describe this is the idea of a more embodied, immersive internet. if you think about the evolution of the internet and where we are today, where we spend a lot of time on the mobile screen, the internet is something that we stare at. We look at the internet. Imagine the metaverse as being one in which you will be in it. And that's at the heart of the idea that we are building for, that there is going to be all of these virtual spaces where even if you're not in the same room as someone else, you still have the sense of being present in the same space. Whether you do that for working, whether you do that for getting entertained together, or whether you do that to buy something. Fundamentally, the idea is of an immersive internet where you're in it and you experience everything around it. And I think it's important to articulate that we're at the beginning of this journey. That vision that you saw outlined in that video is still far away. It could take us 10 years to build it. It could happen in a few years from now. But we're only at the beginning of that journey. And in that context, it's important to describe how it'll be different from the current version of the internet. Because we are convinced that this is the evolution of the internet. This is the next version of the internet. And three things will stand out about this. One is the idea of presence. I think we have all observed, even in the last 2 years, where we were forced to work from home, we did not connect with a lot of our friends and family in person. Being on a Zoom call allowed us to be connected to each other. But that was still 2D. Imagine if the technology can solve for the idea that you will feel that you're in the same room with someone else, even though they're physically millions of miles apart. The second is the idea of persistence and continuity. All of this makes sense only if you can naturally transition from the real world to the metaverse and back. And therefore, a lot of our work is in building technologies. And the video that you're seeing here is the idea of two people playing table tennis. They're both in two different physical contexts, but to them, it feels like they're playing a single match. So how do you ensure that there is continuity in your experience, connecting the physical and the virtual world? And the last one, I think, is an important one. How do we make it interoperable? And there are two elements of interoperability. One is, even in a world where we have 1 billion people on the metaverse in 10 years from now, there's still going to be a lot of people who are still on 2D surfaces, who are still going to be using a laptop or a mobile. How do we make sure that the experience is inclusive, that they are connected to this environment, even though they may not have a headset or a device that connects them to this 3D world? The second idea of interoperability is equally important. This is not building the metaverse. This is not about the Apple metaverse or the Google metaverse. This is to make sure that it's truly interoperable across platforms, across the different pursuits of individual private companies, so that the spaces, as a consumer, you can move from one space to another without losing things that you've acquired in one platform when you move to the other. And for those of you who have been following the mobile version of the internet, you instantly know that this idea is powerful. The idea is that no one company can build a walled garden. And therefore, we don't believe that we are building the metaverse. We believe we are building different elements that will become the metaverse, but it will be built by other companies. It'll be built by creators. It'll be built by developers in India. It'll be built by startups from Bangalore. And the idea is to create a framework that allows all of them to interoperate without any artificial barriers in between. Now, the question is, therefore, what can you do differently in this metaverse? And I thought it might be helpful just to bring it alive about some of the use cases that we're already seeing come alive in the metaverse. And one of it is fitness and health. People are using the headsets to experience a fitness where they're competing with other people and making a material difference to the kind of apps that we have seen around fitness and health in the 2D world. This is an obvious one. I think we know that it's going to radically change the experience of gaming and sports. I'm a huge fan of cricket. The role that I had before Meta was to build Hotstar. And imagine the experience of being inside a stadium, not seeing the match from afar. I think for those of you who have been in a cricket stadium, very often the experience of watching it on a mobile screen or a television screen is actually much better. But imagine what it means if you can place yourself anywhere in the stadium, including on the pitch, and be able to have an immersive version of watching cricket like a player would watch cricket. That's the future that we are envisioning. And of course, one of the areas where we have already seen improvement is around the future of work. Even in a world where people are comfortable going remote, where they're comfortable living in different cities around the world, people still crave community. People still crave the feeling of being present with other team members. And one of the platforms we're building is Horizon Workrooms, where you go into a virtual space and you have the presence that you're in the space experiencing the same physical environment with someone. And one of the things we're going to try and do, if Murphy's Law doesn't kick in, if the meta laws work, is to actually show you that experience right after this presentation, where Rami and I are going to be in a virtual room and you will see what it feels like. And of course, one area where a lot of things will look different is the future of shopping. This video is playing out the visualization of a small company that makes candles. Now, when you make candles, you're selling an image of the experience around the candle. And you can do that through beautiful videos. You can do it through beautiful images. But imagine if you can feel it. If you can feel, in this case, the butterfly effect of a candle. What does it feel like to be in this space where there are butterflies flying around and it's colorful? There is no question that to build affinity and followership, to build entirely new categories, this could be a huge enabler in getting people to experience what you're selling. What is the product and service that you're selling? And we believe that this will revolutionize how commerce is conducted. Commerce has already changed in the last 15 years thanks to the internet. But imagine if you can make people experience something before they buy it. Now, the question that you will ask is, what are you guys doing to help build all of this? And we see our role in three ways. One, of course, is to help build the hardware that is needed to help the world transition from 2D and 3D. These are the headsets, the VR headsets, the AR glasses. A lot of the work that we are doing today is to try and compress all of the computing power, all of the sensors and the batteries, right down to a glass that looks like this. So imagine if this can be your portal to the 3D world. That's a lot of fundamental investment in science and research. And you will see some of that come alive today. When we do the demonstration, you will already see that you can move your hands and the avatar will move the hands in exactly the same manner. The second is we're thinking through how we can build the fundamental software blocks that will help others to create this world. And third, of course, is building toolkits that fundamentally allow other companies, other creators, other developers to build what will be different elements of what will form the metaverse, not just for India, but for the world. And we're starting to go down that by creating a fund that fundamentally allows companies and ideally startups to start experimenting with different ideas around manifestation of some of what I described. And one of the big things to call out, because a lot of this is happening in India right now. If you look at what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years, We transitioned from a country which had about 40 million people who had good access to the internet in 2016, 2017, to today more than 700 million people who have affordable, high-quality access to the internet. That set the context for all of what we have seen in the last 5 years. The emergence of different online communities, the rising role of creators. One of the stats that I want to share with you is we ran a program called Born on Instagram where we had 250,000 creators essentially getting trained on how to create content, how to monetize. 80% of them were from tier 2 and tier 3 towns. So all of the action that's happening around creators is not necessarily in metro India. It's happening across the country. And all of the changes that we're seeing in commerce, and of course, the investments that we're making around the devices and the computing platforms. So the question really in all of this is, where does India fit into this? Where does India fit into this? If you look at some of the early experimentation around this more immersive 3D world, the metaverse, the meta world, you're starting to see experiments already driven by large and small companies in India, whether that's in automotive, healthcare, retail, or even defense and space. And all of it, I'm sure, is intuitive for this audience. In a country where we are looking to massively scale up our manufacturing capacity, imagine the role that the immersive headset devices can play in simulating the assembly line. And that's just not an idea. That is already starting to happen in India. But this is an important point to make, that the opportunity in India is not just to explode all of the innovation that we are seeing out of cities like Bangalore, but it is for us to shape what the metaverse will become globally. What the metaverse will become globally. And this is probably the most powerful idea that we believe we have a role both in enabling as well as in socializing. It is that when the last version of the internet was being formed, whether you draw the timeline back to 1995 or 1999 or even 2005, when the last version of the internet was being shaped around the world, we were a fundamentally different country. We were not in a position to shape the last version of the internet. We were not in a position really to shape the mobile internet, because even 5 years ago, there weren't enough people online. That is dramatically different today. That is dramatically different today. Whether it is the 700 million people who are online, whether it is the rise of the entrepreneurial class, so much from this city, Bangalore, or whether it's the access to capital, but fundamentally, if you look at the tech capacity in India today, the engineers and the product managers and the designers, this is our opportunity to shape what the internet would become. The metaverse is the next version of the internet. And more than any other country, we have the opportunity to shape it. This is our moment. And just to give you a sense of what the opportunity is, and this is our local opportunity, we did some work that said, even if the adoption over the next 10 years follows a regular curve that we saw for the last version of the internet, it will contribute at least $240 billion to India's economy. But I think this is the baseline. This is table stake. Our opportunity is much larger than this. And it's easy for me, being rooted in India, to make the statement. But I thought I should share that the point of view that India can shape the metaverse comes from Mark himself. This is what he said, that this is an opportunity for India to shape the future of the metaverse. And I think that is the big idea here. That is the big idea that we are working towards. That's the big idea when we partner with governments around the country, in Delhi and other state governments. That's the idea behind many of the partnerships we have done with CBSE, as well as local startups. The idea that this future that can happen around the next 10 years. And by the way, we benefit from it. We benefit from India shaping this future. That for many reasons, it's India's moment. It is India's moment to grab and shape the next version of the metaverse. Thank you. I'm now going to the virtual room, and if the internet works, I want to demonstrate what the experience of being in a 3D environment looks like. So give me 2 minutes.
And yeah, please continue.
Thank you, Arvind, very much. Thank you, Jeet, for that experience.
Thank you.
It was absolutely fantastic. Anything you would like to ask?
No, I think if there are questions, happy to answer them. Hopefully we were able to make it come alive a bit.
Before we take a couple of questions, I'd like to say it's incredible, the space that you see, the theme that you see. It's almost like you can look at it, feel it. When we did the high five, you could sense it. So literally, thank you for taking